Chapter 2379. Saints were experts on the same level as Grand Exalts. Jianqin did not even dare to dream of obtaining 10 droplets of essence, blood, from Grand Exalts. He understood that he could not obtain the assistance of the artifact spirit or even directly possess the bronze divine hall in a short amount of time. Afterwards, Jianqin conversed with the artifact spirit for a while. In the end, he was forced to accept the fact that it was impossible for him to obtain anything useful from the primeval divine hall before he obtained 10 droplets of essence, blood, from Grand Exalts. I'll leave behind an imprint on the back of your hand. This imprint is the key to the world of grand clarity. When you find 10 droplets of essence, blood one day, activate the imprint using the method I have taught you. The gateway to the world of grand clarity will open before you. Remember, you can only use this imprint to open the gateway to the world of grand clarity when you're in normal space. In some strange places or some sealed spaces, or even some small worlds opened up by supreme experts, this imprint will lose its effect. This imprint can only open the gateway to the world of grand clarity once for you. So before you find 10 droplets of essence blood, you cannot activate this imprint. I no longer have the power to leave behind a second key to the world of grand clarity on you, while I'm bound by the power of the curse. Even if you enter the world of grand clarity through another method, I only have the power to bring you here once, because the primeval divine hall is not in the world of grand clarity. That power can only be used after you find 10 droplets of essence blood. The curse of the Tao Union Saint has suppressed me for far too long. I can't stay awake for too long, so I need to continue sleeping. You can leave on your own. The absolute beginning artifact spirit gave a lot of instructions. After its final sentence sounded, its body, which was formed from green light, scattered with the wind like a wisp of green smoke. Jianqin was sent back to the first floor of the primeval divine hall by the artifact spirit where he had just entered. The method to activate the imprint was imprinted in his head as well. The ancient hall immediately became quiet. Only Jianqin stood there alone in the vast hall, as well as the unconscious Donglin Yanxue in his arms. Master, we still haven't recovered from the fusion of the twin swords. We still need to sleep for a while. The voices of the sword spirits rang out in Jianqin's head. Afterwards, Jianqin could sense that the sword spirits had fallen into a deep slumber once again. At that moment, Jianqin felt guilty. He understood that the fusion of the twin swords had cost the sword spirits far too much when he ignored their objections in order to help Mo Tianyun's original body break free. Even now, they still had not recovered. I have to obtain the 10 droplets of essence, blood, from Grand Exalts. Even if it's not for the primeval divine hall, it has to be for the strand of primeval force. At that moment, Jianqin swore inside. The only thing he could compensate the sword spirits now was the primeval force that could allow them to reach another level in their peak condition. After that, he looked at the back of his hand. On the back of his hand, there was a faint imprint. As he watched, the imprint was gradually fading away until it completely disappeared. However, Jianqin knew that the key to the world of grand clarity had completely fused with the back of his hand, hidden away. Only he could sense the existence of the imprint. Jianqin carried the unconscious Donglin Yanxue out of the primeval divine hall and appeared outside. The outside of the primeval divine hall was the same as when he had arrived. The surroundings were enveloped by a strange mist, while the primeval divine hall shone with a dazzling azure light that seemed to last forever, illuminating the surroundings. That should be the tunnel to leave this place. Jianqin stared ahead. The strange mist formed a whirlpool that slowly revolved there. Even though it was white within the whirlpool, Jianqin could sense the power of space. However, he did not leave because he vaguely understood that as long as he remained here, Donglin Yanxue would remain unconscious. She would never wake up. Her unconsciousness did not come from her wounds. Instead, it came from the artifact spirit of primeval. The artifact spirit of primeval was unwilling to accept another as its master, so it did not want Donglin Yen Shui to know about its existence. It was just in case Donglin Yen Shui leaked the news and drew in experts from the outside world. If she wakes up, I really will be restrained. It looks like I'll have to stay here for a while longer. Jianqin was in no hurry to leave. Instead, with a thought, the Anata Tower suddenly appeared. The Anata Tower that was covered in sword slashes and seemed extremely damaged expanded to several hundred meters tall under Jianqin's control. It stood there silently. The hall spirit had already hidden in this strange space for 2 epochs. As a result, he did not have to worry about the experts of the outside world finding the Anata Tower when he took it out. Afterwards, Jianqin placed the unconscious Donglin Yen Shui outside the Anata Tower so that she would continue to be affected by the hall spirit. He entered the Anata Tower with a flash. What Jianqin did not know was that the moment he took out the Anata Tower, a hazy figure sat within a hazy light within the majestic heavenly palace of Bixing at the very center of the Prosper Plain. The power of ways revolved around the figure, invoking the mysteries of the world. Vaguely, the sound of ways seemed to ring through the sky like a great bell. The figure seemed to have fused with the ways, becoming the ways of the world. It was truly supreme, possessing supreme power that could control the operations of the world. It represented the supreme will of the world. At this moment, the figure seemed to sense something. His eyes suddenly snapped open. They were a pair of eyes filled with endless coldness. They were emotionless and looked down on all life. Primeval force, the figure murmured. His voice contained all the sounds in the world. His cold gaze seemed to be able to pierce through space and reach the depths of the universe. Heya, break through here. Jianqin stood outside a divine hall within the Anata Tower as he spoke to the black-robed Heya. Hey, ye had already reached the peak of the divine king realm, and he had comprehended the mysteries of the primordial realm after receiving the flower of ways from Jianqin. He could break through at any time. However, the divine hall he stayed in before was unable to endure the pulses of energy from his breakthrough due to its limited level. As a result, he could only postpone the breakthrough under Jianqin's request. Now that they were in the wondrous space where the artifact spirit resided, Jianqin did not have to worry about the Anata Tower being exposed. As a result, he set the Anata Tower as the place where Heya would break through. Yes, master, Heya replied politely before sitting down on the ground. He began to break through. Jianqin smiled happily as he watched Heya prepare to break through. Heya's breakthrough to the primordial realm held extremely great significance to him. This was because it meant that he would have a primordial realm expert under his control, and it would be a primordial realm expert who was completely under his control. He could take action for him at any time. At that moment, Jianqin could not help but think of what had happened in the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Back then, when the divine kingdom of Pingtian faced the invasion of the heavenly demon religion, just the vice leader of the primordial realm, Huayan, was enough to suffocate all the experts of the divine kingdom of Pingtian. At that time, the primordial realm was synonymous with expert. As a matter of fact, in the eyes of many divine king experts, the primordial realm was an insurmountable mountain. This was because there was a huge divide between the primordial realm and godhood. Out of the countless divine king experts in the saints' world, there were very few who could truly reach the primordial realm. Once a divine kingdom possessed a primordial realm expert, the status of the divine kingdom would immediately change. It would become an empire. Chapter 2380. Suddenly, Jianqin's heart skipped a beat. He slowly raised his hand, and an extremely beautiful orchid slowly appeared in his hand. The orchid seemed to be alive, possessing quite a bit of intelligence. As soon as it appeared, it swayed as if it was trying to get on good terms with Jianqin. Jianqin stared at the immortal devouring orchid in his hand as he smiled faintly. You finally reached godhood. You should be able to enjoy the 2 corpses of the Divine King now. As he said that, the 2 corpses of the Divine King slowly drifted out from the Divine Hall. landing beside Jianqin's feet gently. The two corpses of the Divine King belonged to the people Jianqin had sent to deal with him when he left the Radiant Saint Hall. In the end, they were dragged into the Divine Hall by Heya and died to his hands. Jianqin had always kept their corpses for the immortal devouring orchid to devour. Their corpses were the nutrients for the immortal devouring orchid to grow. The immortal devouring orchid possessed a certain level of intelligence now. As soon as it saw the two corpses of the Divine King, it became especially excited. It immediately leapt down from Jianqin's hand and took root in one of the corpses. Its roots began to spread. The current immortal devouring orchid had only reached godhood recently, so it was equivalent to an early deity. With its current strength, it was naturally unable to devour the corpses of two god kings that far surpassed it in a single stroke. As a result, it only used its roots to stab into the corpses' wounds, bringing out a droplet of the Divine King's blood. It began to absorb it slowly. The energy within the corpses of Divine Kings was just too tremendous to the immortal devouring orchid right now. As a result, the immortal devouring orchid could only absorb a single droplet of the Divine King's blood at a time. Jianqin watched the immortal devouring orchid's actions quietly. His eyes were filled with eagerness. The immortal devouring orchid at early deity might only be able to absorb a single droplet of the Divine King's blood at a time. But as it rapidly became stronger in the future, the amount of blood it could absorb would constantly increase. Once it reached a certain level of strength, it would be able to directly devour an entire corpse or even multiple Divine King's corpses. I'll give the two corpses of the Divine King to you. In the future, stay here and properly increase your strength, Jianqin said gently. Right now, the immortal devouring orchid was unable to provide him with any assistance, but he firmly believed what the sword spirits had said before. The immortal devouring orchid would be a great assistance to him in the future. Where Qing's hand was, Qing Yishuan currently sat on the fortune jade that was the size of a millstone. She shone with golden light, giving off a holy presence. Laws of the sword revolved around her as sword qi condensed. They shone with dazzling white light as they revolved around Qing Yishuan like tiny tadpoles. With Qing Yishuan as the center, the area several dozen meters around her was enveloped by sharp sword qi. Early overgod. Jianqin could tell Qing Yishuan's current strength with a single glance. He could not help but nod secretly. At this rate, Qing Yishuan would reach the Divine King's level of cultivation or even the primordial realm before too long. Of course, the reason she was able to improve so quickly was not only because of the golden core of the laws of sword in her body, but also because of the fortune divine jade. It's very easy to break through the bottlenecks at the beginning, so with the assistance of the golden core of laws and the fortune jade, her rate of progress can be described as godlike. However, the further she goes, the more difficult it becomes to break through. Even with the golden core of laws and the fortune jade, she needs some time to settle down. I wonder how long it'll take you to comprehend the laws of the sword to the Divine King's level of cultivation, murmured Qing Yishuan softly. With the fortune jade, he could directly comprehend the mysteries of the golden core of laws. In just half a year, he could reach early Divine King's level of comprehension of a law. However, it was impossible for Qing Yishuan to reach his speed. As a result, even if Qing Yishuan used the same method as Jianqin, she would still take much longer than Jianqin. Jianqin reached out, and Qing Yishuan, who sat on the fortune jade, was immediately enveloped by an invisible power. She slowly rose up and left the fortune jade. The fortune jade, which was the size of a millstone, suddenly flew up and landed in Jianqin's hand. During this process, Qing Yishuan failed to sense anything at all because she had been taken away by Jianqin's power from the Inata Tower. Under Jianqin's purposeful control, it did not affect her at all. Afterwards, Jianqin left the 9th floor with the fortune jade and appeared before Heya on the 1st floor. With a thought, he controlled the power of the Inata Tower and placed the fortune jade below Heya in the same manner. Immediately, the misty light from the fortune jade engulfed Heya, causing his figure to fade in and out of sight. With the assistance of the fortune jade, Jianqin could clearly sense that Heya's presence had risen several times faster than before. Clearly, the fortune jade would be extremely helpful to Heya's breakthrough. I hope you can reach the primordial realm successfully before I leave, thought Jianqin. In order for Heya to reach the primordial realm in the shortest amount of time possible, Jianqin used everything he could think of. He even used a treasure like the fortune jade on Heya without any hesitation. He really did everything he could to nurture Heya. Jianqin did not remain idle afterwards. He used this short amount of time to enter secluded cultivation as well. Out of the 7 laws I inherited in the underground cavern, I've comprehended the laws of strength, space, and destruction to the divine king realm. As for the laws of creation, fire, corrosion, and curses, I've already comprehended the laws of curses to mid over God. I'm not far away from the divine king realm. I need to comprehend the 7 laws to the divine king realm as soon as possible, as this will determine whether I can leave the desolate plane with ease in the future. Even if I can't keep the Initat Tower, I can only hand it over to the heavenly palace of Bixing personally. I can't let anyone else benefit from it. Jianqin closed his eyes. The laws that belonged to the power of curses slowly descended and revolved around him. Chapter 2381. The sudden development roused Jianqin from his comprehension of the laws of curses. He opened his eyes and looked at Heya nearby. He smiled happily. Heya had finally broken through the shackles of the divine king's realm and successfully reached the primordial realm. He had become a primordial realm expert. Master. Before long, the energy around Heya gradually dispersed. He stood up and bowed towards Jianqin with undisguised excitement. Your golden core of laws has stabilized. Jianqin stared at Heya with shining eyes. Heya nodded. He glanced at the fortune jade below him and said excitedly, logically speaking, it should have taken quite some time for the golden core of laws to evolve from the divine king to the primordial realm. However, not only has this piece of jade shortened the time required, but it has even sped up the evolution of my golden core of laws, allowing me to consolidate my cultivation as an infinite prime in an extremely short amount of time. Master, I've officially become a primordial realm expert now. From today onwards, I can truly contribute to Master. Heya was overjoyed. He was filled with deep gratitude towards Jianqin. This was because he understood that if it were not for the invaluable heavenly resources that Jianqin had given him extremely generously, his plan to reach the primordial realm probably would have been put on hold indefinitely. As a matter of fact, he might not even have the opportunity to reach the primordial realm. The primordial realm had once been a realm that Heya could only dream of. It was a dream that he pursued his entire life. Now, his dream had finally come true. Yeah, you haven't let me down. Jianqin nodded in satisfaction. At this moment, Heya looked at the fortune jade below him. Undisguised amazement filled his face as he asked, Master, may I ask what this is? I feel like sitting on it has not only shortened the time it takes for my golden core of laws to evolve, but it's also countless times easier for me to comprehend the laws of the world. The fortune jade was a supreme treasure of the world. It was rare and precious. Even many grand exalts did not possess one, so Heya naturally did not recognize it. It's better if you don't know about the existence of this thing. Jianqin seemed to have some misgivings and did not reveal the existence of the fortune, divine, jade to Heya. Heya also understood that the jade at his feet was no small matter, so he did not ask. After that, Jianqin gave Black Crow some instructions before continuing to comprehend the curse law. This time, Jianqin sat on the fortune jade. With the assistance of the fortune jade, the speed at which he comprehended the laws of curses increased exponentially. Many of the mysteries of curses that were previously difficult to comprehend instantly became much clearer. Soon after, Jianqin's body, which was seated on the creation divine jade, trembled slightly as his tightly shut eyes opened. My laws of curses have successfully broken through to the divine king realm as well, remaining at the early divine king realm. Now, I've comprehended 4 of the 7 laws to the divine king realm. Only the laws of creation, the laws of fire, and the laws of corrosion remain. The law of curses is truly incomparably profound. Once I grasp the law of curses, I only need to possess a strand of my opponent's hair, a single strand of hair, or even a personal item, and then I'll be able to use it as a medium to utilize the power of curses from a long distance away and kill, without leaving a trace. As a matter of fact, when the difference in cultivation between the 2 of us is too great, I don't even need any items or mediums. I only need to think about them, and I can cast curses from afar. With my current ability, I don't even need to personally appear if I want to kill someone like Jianshin. I only need to cast curses outside the Radiant Saint Hall, and Jianshin's soul will be wiped out. Even in an open battle, I can cast curses with the laws of curses and make them only use 80 or 90% of their strength. Jianshin could not help but sneer when he thought about the various wonders of the laws of curses. The power of curses was indeed nowhere near as powerful as the laws of the sword and the laws of strength in an open battle, but could achieve many things that the laws of the sword and the laws of strength could not. It could indirectly increase his battle prowess. The flow of time is completely different in different spaces. I don't even know how much time has passed while I've been cultivating. The gateway to the world of moon and star will be opened by the Radiant Saint Hall again in a year. It looks like it's time for me to leave. Jianshin ended his cultivation. After a moment of thought, he placed the fortune jade back on Qing Yishuan's seat and left the Enata Tower. Hey, you would be of great help to Jianshin after breaking through to the primordial realm. As a result, Jianshin did not leave Heya in the Enata Tower. Instead, he got Heya to remain in the Divine Hall with his presence concealed so that he could take action at any time. After all, the Enata Tower could not be used at all times during such a sensitive period. Jianshin stowed the Enata Tower away and entered the swirl of mist with Donglin Yanxue in his arms. The whirlpool was clearly a spatial tunnel similar to teleportation formations. As soon as he stepped into the whirlpool, Jianshin felt like he had stepped into another world. However, this feeling only lasted for an instant before his vision returned to normal. Looking around, he saw that he had already appeared in a beautiful mountain forest, and in the sky above him, a moon and a star hung there, sprinkling down a bright starlight. Jianshin knew that he had returned to the world of moon and star when he saw the star and moon above him. The world of moon and star was actually the world of grand clarity mentioned by the artifact spirit of Primeval. 2 eons ago, this world was the territory of the master of the artifact spirit of Primeval, the saint of grand clarity. However, after 2 eons, the current world of grand clarity was no longer as glorious as it was in the past. The world of grand clarity is also filled with the curse of the Dao Union Saint. Not only does the existence of the curse make the world of grand clarity even more fragile, but it even affects the vicious beasts that live here, Jianshin thought. He closed his eyes and sensed for a while. Although he was unable to find the curse left behind by the Dao Union Saint with his current level of cultivation, he had grasped the laws of curses after all, so he could naturally sense it vaguely. The reason why the vicious beasts that live here are protected by the world, allowing them to display great battle prowess, is probably related to the Saint of Grand Clarity. Although the Saint of Grand Clarity is dead, he was still a Grand Exalt who had transformed into a Way after all. Before he died, he used his supreme will to influence the world and set down some sort of law. As for the reason why the vicious beasts lack intelligence, it's probably related to the Dao Union Saint's curse. Vaguely, Jianshin seemed to understand many things. As a result, the world of moon and star no longer seemed mysterious to him. Chapter 2382. But even if it really is like what I imagine it to be, who knows how long it'll take for me to become the ruler of the world of moon and star. 10 droplets of essence blood from Grand Exalts. Isn't that easy? Jianqin dismissed his thoughts and stopped thinking about this for now. Instead, he lowered his head and observed Donglin Yanshui. Donglin Yanshui remained in his arms. Her eyes were still closed, and she was unconscious. Her senses towards the outside world had been reduced to 0. Her wounds haven't worsened, but they haven't improved either. Now that the mist is gone, she should wake up very soon, Jianqin murmured. He observed the surroundings before flying off in a certain direction. Donglin Yanshui was unconscious, so there was no need for him to continue hiding his strength. He immediately traveled as quickly as he could, flying towards the depths of the world of moon and star. At the same time, he used the laws of space. With the assistance of the laws of space, he moved extremely quickly. He could cross 1,000 kilometers or even 2,000 kilometers in a single instance. A distance of 10,000 miles was merely a few breaths of time in his eyes. Although I don't know how much time has passed, I need to get as far away as possible before Donglin Yanshui wakes up and avoid Aoyama. Although I don't fear Aoyama, it's impossible for Donglin Yanshui to remain unconscious forever. Once she wakes up, I won't be able to take action, or my identity will be exposed, and I won't be able to enter the Tower of Radiance anymore. Now, I can only hope that Aoyama has already left the world of moon and star. Jianqin thought. As he traveled at full speed, he paid attention to Donglin Yanshui at all times. Once Donglin Yanshui showed signs of waking up, he would need to slow down. Jianqin moved with lightning speed. Spatial power revolved around him as if he had fused with space, allowing him to move even faster than lightning. In just a short moment, he had already traveled several million kilometers. Suddenly, Jianqin came to a halt. He stopped in a stone forest and stared ahead. A white-robed divine king lay on the ground 100 meters away. Most of his pure white robes had been dyed red with blood. He had completely lost all signs of life, having been reduced to an ice-cold corpse. Jianqin arrived before the corpse and looked at the familiar face of the Divine King. He recognized the Divine King. He was one of the protectors who had come here with Donglin Yanshui. However, he had abandoned Donglin Yanshui when he was pursued by Aoyama. Jianqin felt no sympathy for the death of the Divine King at all. At the same time, the deaths of these people were within his expectations. Aoyama had entered the world of moon and star to clean up the candidates training there. However, with the enmity between the martial soul lineage and the Radiant Saint Hall, even if the protectors abandoned the candidates and fled for their lives, they would not be able to escape death in the end. I wonder how many protectors are still alive in the world of moon and star, and whether the other 4 candidates are dead or not, Jianqin murmured. However, he did not let go of the protector's corpse. He stowed it away in his divine hall. Now that the immortal devouring orchid had gradually matured, it required more and more corpses as it grew stronger. Instead of leaving the Divine King's corpse here to benefit the vicious beasts, he would be better off using it as nourishment for the immortal devouring orchid. Afterwards, in order to avoid leaving any traces behind, Jianqin changed the scene into one where vicious beasts had passed by before leaving. When the world of moon and star opens, the elders of the Radiant Saint Hall will definitely enter the world of moon and star to conduct a thorough search. Jianqin continued on his way with Donglin Yanshui in his arms. Along the way, he found many dwellings occupied by vicious beasts with the senses of his soul. Perhaps it was because of the strange mist, but all the dwellings were empty. The vicious beasts that lived there had already fled far away, and they had yet to return. Clearly, the vicious beasts feared the mist very much. Even after the mist had dispersed, they still did not return. There are quite a few radiant origin pearls in the territories of the vicious beasts. It's just that every single radiant origin pearl has been purposely placed there by the elders of the Sacred Hall. The number of radiant origin pearls is recorded clearly, so I can't take a single one. Jianqin was filled with pity. He could sense pure radiant saint force origin energy within the radiant origin pearls. If he used it for cultivation, it would be extremely beneficial to any radiant saint master. Before long, Donglin Yen Shui finally woke up. As soon as she woke up, Jianqin immediately slowed down. He only used the ability of a radiant saint master with a one-colored soul core to travel. As a result, he was naturally as slow as an ant compared to before. This is the world of moon and star. Changyang, how did we make it out of the mist? As soon as she woke up, Donglin Yen Shui asked. I don't know either. I just walked around and came out. The mist was very strange. Its appearance made all the vicious beasts in the world of moon and star very uneasy. Didn't you encounter any danger in there? Donglin Yen Shui was extremely curious. She had fainted very quickly in the mist, so she had no idea what had happened. No, the mist might have been a threat to the vicious beasts, but it shouldn't have targeted us. Jianqin casually brushed it off. The mist was actually a combination of the power of the primeval artifact spirit and the power of the curse. He believed that no one else knew of its existence apart from himself and the sword spirits. The mist shouldn't have been so simple. If I can make it out alive, I'll definitely report this to the elders. Jianqin carried Donglin Yen Shui for an entire day before finding a cave to rest. He acted like he was recovering. Fortunately, we didn't come across any vicious beasts along the way. However, I wonder if the greatest threat, Aoyama, has left or not. I hope he has already left the world of moon and star. In the gloomy cave, Donglin Yen Shui leaned against the wall weakly as she sat on the ground. Deep worry filled her face. Due to the appearance of the strange mist, many vicious beasts had fled far away in fright. A very large area of safety had appeared in the world of moon and star. She no longer needed to worry too much about the threat from the vicious beasts. Only Aoyama's existence made her feel uneasy. We should have stayed in the mist for quite some time. The world of moon and star should open soon. Perhaps Aoyama has already left, Jianqin said as he acted like he was recovering nearby. However, his face changed very soon. His powerful soul had already sensed Aoyama's presence. Even though Aoyama did not purposefully radiate with a terrifying presence, he did not hide it at all either. He flew towards Jianqin in a straight line. Oh no, Aoyama is actually still in the world of moon and star. Not only has he not left, but he's even found my exact location. How did he find us? Jianqin's heart sank. He looked at Donglin Yen Shui nearby, and the light in his eyes flickered. Donglin Yen Shui was still conscious right now. If he struck, he would directly expose himself. He had thought about knocking Donglin Yen Shui unconscious, but once Donglin Yen Shui woke up, she would only need to think about it slightly to expose his strength. After all, Donglin Yen Shui had a peak 4-colored soul core. Even though she was heavily injured, she was not someone a radiant saint master with a 1-colored soul core could knock out so easily. Chapter 2383. Am I really going to be exposed? Jianqin glanced at the oblivious Donglin Yen Shui before looking outside the cave. The light in his eyes flickered as he weighed the pros and cons. However, a sliver of surprise flashed through his eyes soon after. Although he was still 1,000,000 kilometers away from Aoyama, he was like a lantern in the night to Jianqin because Aoyama had failed to conceal his presence. Jianqin could clearly sense his location at all times. However, at this moment, Aoyama had actually stopped 1,000,000 kilometers away from Jianqin. He did not approach them. Aoyama clearly knows our exact location, but he hasn't come over. Instead, he's watching from afar. What is he doing? Jianqin became doubtful about Aoyama's actions. After a moment of hesitation, Jianqin looked at Donglin Yen Shui and said, "Rest here for a while. I'll go observe the surroundings." With that, Jianqin stood up and left the cave. Donglin Yen Shui leaned against the cave wall powerlessly as she stared at Jianqin with mixed feelings. After leaving the cave, Jianchen condensed a pair of radiant wings and arrived 10,000 kilometers away with his cultivation as a radiant Saint Master. Only then did he erupt with his cultivation as a fighter and unleash his speed, directly flying towards Aoyama's location. He moved extremely quickly, crossing 1,000 kilometers in a single instance. A while later, Jianchen arrived before Aoyama. He stood 100 meters away from him. As for Qingshan, he was sitting cross-legged on a rock. His body was as lofty as a mountain, giving off an indomitable feeling. Powerful auras revolved around him. "You've come." Aoyama looked at Jianchen calmly. At that moment, he seemed like a dormant volcano. He seemed as calm as water on the surface, but astonishing energy was hidden within. Jianchen frowned slightly. Originally, he thought that an intense battle would continue between him and Aoyama. As a result, he had already mentally prepared himself for another battle with Aoyama. However, when he saw Aoyama again, he actually did not sense any battle intent or killing intent from the Divine King. For a moment, he actually became rather confused about Aoyama's intentions. "You and the candidate, Donglin Yanxue, have already vanished for 8 months. I have a secret technique that can search for all the radiant Saint Masters in the entire world of moon and star. During this period of time, I searched the entire world of moon and star more than once. Let alone radiant god kings, even many elders of the sacred hall were unable to avoid my search. However, you and Donglin Yanxue really have vanished, as if you're no longer in the world of moon and star. Only recently did I find traces of you again." Aoyama stared at Jianchen calmly, as if he was studying him closely. Jianchen stood 100 meters away with his hands behind his back. His presence was sharp as if an invisible sword had condensed around him. He radiated with a cold sword chi. "I never thought that you would actually have a secret technique that can search for all the radiant Saint Masters in the entire world of moon and star. In other words, most of the radiant Saint Masters who entered the world of moon and star have died under your pursuit? Aside from Donglin Yanxue, who is with you, the other 4 are all dead. I've killed 45 of the 48 Divine King that entered the world of moon and star." Aoyama did not know the situation of the Radiant Saint Hall like the back of his hand, but he knew a lot of information. He stared at Jianchen deeply and continued, "Originally, all the candidates and Divine King who entered the world of moon and star could forget about leaving alive because I wanted the Radiant Saint Hall to not have a chosen saint this year. That would be an extremely awkward matter to them. It would make them lose a lot of face. However, your existence made me change my mind. It's not like I can't find the other 3 Radiant God Kings. Killing them would be as easy as flipping my hand. It's because of you that I gave up on killing them and spared their lives, allowing them to leave here alive." "Aoyama, we don't know each other. So why did you give up on killing others because of me?" Jianchen asked. Aoyama smiled mysteriously. "It's very simple. If everyone who entered the world of moon and star died, only you and Donglin Yanxue remained alive, it would be a mystery as to why the 2 of you managed to escape from me. The elders and vice leaders will definitely do everything they can to find the reason, under their investigation. Even if you can explain it away, it'll increase the risk. However, if I leave a few more people alive, it'll be even better for you. It'll be able to erase the suspicions the elders have towards you. They'll think that your survival is due to luck. You're helping me? But why are you helping me?" Jianchen asked in confusion. Aoyama stood up and stared at Jianchen with shining eyes. He said seriously, "Because you're a member of our martial soul lineage. Our martial soul lineage has always been as close as brothers since ancient times. We're a family. As long as you possess martial soul force, you'll be a successor of our martial soul lineage regardless of your identity or race. You'll be a person blessed by the heavens, and you possess martial soul force. Even though your martial soul force is extremely weak, it's unable to deny the fact that you're a successor of our martial soul lineage. As a result, not only are we not enemies, but we're also fellow disciples who look after each other wholeheartedly. Aoyame's answer surprised Genshin. He knew he possessed martial soul force, but he had never thought that the martial soul lineage would actually possess such a secret. That's a little too absurd. Although I possess martial soul force, I have nothing to do with your martial soul lineage, Genshin said. You're wrong. Every single person who possesses martial soul force is born from the world. This is just like Radiant Saint Masters. Whether a person has the potential to become a Radiant Saint Master is determined the moment they're born. If they do, then they do. If they don't, then they don't. Unlike fighters who can start off as mortals and cultivate step by step, even mortals without any talent can be modified and raised through various heavenly resources and various methods. As a result, there's a saying that Radiant Saint Masters are born from the world. The same principle applies to us martial soul force. However, the birth of martial soul force is countless times more difficult than the birth of Radiant Saint Masters. Every single person who possesses martial soul force is an existence blessed by the heavens. In every generation, it's impossible for the number of people who possess martial soul force to reach the double digits. It's exactly because there are so few people in our martial soul lineage that we're protected by the will of the heavens. The laws of the world form a special law, allowing every single person who possesses martial soul force to follow the guidance of the will of the heavens and walk together in the end. In the beginning, I, Aoyama, was the same as you. I cultivated alone and wandered the saints' world by myself. But in the end, I entered the martial soul mountain by coincidence. It's not just me. Even the other seniors of our martial soul mountain, as well as the deceased seniors of our martial soul lineage, have all become members of the martial soul mountain through various methods. There have been no exceptions throughout history. Chapter 2384. I'm wanted by many powerful existences right now. Aren't you afraid that I'll bring you trouble if you make me a member of the martial soul lineage? Genshin asked. He knew that Aoyama would understand what he was implying and the karma involved. With Aoyama's intelligence, he had already learned Genshin's true identity when he fought Genshin. Although our martial soul lineage can't become a grand prime, you can't underestimate us. Although our martial soul lineage only has 7 people, we don't fear any of the experts on the desolate plane aside from the celestial sword saint. No one can threaten us. Even if the peak experts work together, we can defend the martial soul mountain. As long as we stay on the martial soul mountain, even the celestial sword saint won't be able to do anything to us. Let alone the celestial sword saint. Even existences slightly more powerful than the celestial sword saint can't enter the martial soul mountain. As a result, in my opinion, you're in dire straits now that you're surrounded by so many peak experts with the Inata Tower. Even if you flee from the desolate plain, they'll search for you endlessly. However, as long as you enter the martial soul mountain, they won't be able to do anything to you. Aoyama swore confidently. He was filled with confidence. Is the martial soul mountain that powerful? Can the celestial sword saint, or even existences even more powerful than the celestial sword saint, stop them? Genshin was surprised. The celestial sword saint was a powerful existence that even the Azure Pung King dared not set foot on the desolate plain. The martial soul mountain is where our martial soul lineage resides. It's exactly because of the martial soul mountain that our martial soul lineage can exist for all eternity in the saints' world, never facing destruction. The only flaw is that the martial soul mountain can only serve as the final defense of our martial soul lineage, protecting us from extinction. It can't help us conquer the world. Aoyama looked at Genshin with undisguised admiration and admiration. He continued, I know you hid your identity and entered the Radiant Saint Hall, and you protected Donglin Yanxue in the trial to enter the Tower of Radiance. Indeed, the Tower of Radiance is a supreme treasure of the Radiant Saint Hall. It was left behind by a sovereign of the world who had reached grand exalt in the history of the Radiant Saint Hall. It contains the great fortune of Radiant Saint Masters. All the cultivation methods and radiant arts in the outside world come from the Tower of Radiance. As a matter of fact, even the knowledge of the leader and vice leader of the Radiant Saint Hall comes from the Tower of Radiance. The Tower of Radiance is an endless treasure trove to any hallowed Saint Master. It can change their fate. But I have to tell you that the major forces that have gathered in the barren state have already begun searching for your whereabouts through blood tests. Under the joint efforts of the top experts from all over the barren state, no one in the barren state will be able to escape this, no matter who they are. As a result, as long as you remain on the desolate plane, you'll be discovered sooner or later. If you return to the Radiant Saint Hall with Donlin Yenshui, you'll face the risk of your identity being exposed. Once your identity is exposed, I think you understand what kind of outcome awaits you. Do you have a better way for me to enter the Tower of Radiance? Jianqin remained calm. He had already expected this. Our martial soul lineage is on opposing sides with the Radiant Saint Hall. This is the enmity that has been accumulated from generation to generation. It's irreconcilable now, so I can't help you enter the Tower of Radiance. However, you're the 8th successor of the martial soul lineage. What you should truly grasp is martial soul force and not the cultivation methods in the Tower of Radiance. Although some of the cultivation methods in the Tower of Radiance are extremely powerful, where they can be described as earth-shaking, you're not a regular hallowed Saint Master after all. You're a successor of the martial soul lineage. Even if you obtain the most powerful cultivation method in the Tower of Radiance, you won't be able to break through to Grand Prime. As a result, there's no need for you to take the risk and enter the Tower of Radiance. Leaving with me and returning to the Martial Soul Mountain is the safest and most reliable choice. Aoyama stared at Jianqin with shining eyes as he tried his best to convince him. The Martial Soul Mountain possesses the various cultivation methods and comprehensions passed down by the past seniors of our martial soul lineage. They're the most precious treasures of our martial soul mountain. They can allow you to gain a clearer understanding of martial soul force and grasp how to make it grow. Return to the martial soul mountain with me, and you can use the resources as much as you want. Jianqin was immediately tempted. He had never found a suitable cultivation method to practice his martial soul force, so it remained in its initial state. It was so weak that it was unable to affect any of the divine kings at all. It was not that he had never thought about creating a cultivation method for martial soul force. However, creating a cultivation method required a very long period of time. It was definitely not as simple as just talking about it. He had only experienced an extremely short amount of time ever since he had matured. It had only been a few hundred years, and he had basically spent all that time on increasing his chaotic body and laws of the sword. He did not have any extra time or energy to create a cultivation method for martial soul force. As a result, his martial soul force had always been set aside. It had not improved at all. Now that Aoyama had appeared, Jianqin had finally found an opportunity for his martial soul force to grow. Naturally, he was tempted. However, in the end, he shook his head gently and refused to leave with Aoyama. I hid in the Radiant Saint Hall and spent so much effort just to enter the Tower of Radiance. Now that I'm only a step away from the Tower of Radiance, how can I give up halfway? I won't give up on the Tower of Radiance. Seeing how Jianqin had made up his mind, Aoyama did not try to persuade him any further. He said, I'll teach you a method. When you come to the Martial Soul Mountain, you can use this method to sense the location of the Martial Soul Mountain. Our Martial Soul Mountain is not on the 49 Great Plains or the 81 Great Planets. Instead, it drifts through the endless cosmos. With your strength, it'll be very difficult to find the Martial Soul Mountain without an accurate location. There are very few people in our Martial Soul lineage. Every addition is a huge matter to us. So I need to let my 6 seniors know about your appearance as soon as possible. As for martial soul force, it's a legacy of a mental imprint. Only the Martial Soul Mountain can accept it, so I can't help you. With that, Aoyama left. He used a special method to rip open the space of the world of moon and star, creating a spatial tunnel and vanishing from there. Chapter 2385. Donglin Yen Shui sat alone in the gloomy cave. She leaned against the wall weakly as she stared at the entrance of the cave. Jianqin's departure left only Donglin Yen Shui in the cave. Injured, she had basically lost the ability to protect herself, so she immediately became nervous and uneasy. She also felt a strong sense of unease. In a daze, Donglin Yen Shui could not help but think about how Jianqin had carried her in his arms as they fled for their lives in the world of moon and star that was filled with danger. Faced with Aoyama's pursuit, the 8th divine king that she relied on the most had abandoned her without any hesitation at all. He fled alone, leaving her all alone. However, Changyang, who was clearly the weakest, remained by her side the entire time. Even when she had become a burden now, he still did not abandon her, going through life and death with her. Donglin Yen Shui was deeply moved by this. After this matter, Donglin Yen Shui truly understood what kind of person Jianqin was. At this moment, a series of footsteps rang out from outside. Donglin Yen Shui immediately tensed up and called out, "Who is it?" "It's me." Jianqin's voice rang out from outside the cave. With that, he entered the cave. Donglin Yen Shui immediately let out a sigh of relief when she heard Jianqin's voice. She asked, "What's the situation outside?" "It's peaceful." Jianqin sat down where he had been before. The light in his eyes flickered as he said in thought, "The strange mist has scared away all the vicious beasts. Even though the mist has vanished, the vicious beasts are still afraid to return to their territories. As a result, I didn't come across a single vicious beast when I passed by. We've been trapped in the mist for a very long time. Although I don't know exactly how much time has passed, I'm guessing that the 1-year period should be over. The gate to the world of moon and star will open again very soon. We just need to wait here quietly. But our greatest threat isn't the vicious beasts. It's Aoyama." Donglin Yen Shui was unable to cheer up at all. She had already given up on searching for radiant origin pearls now. She only wanted to leave this place safely. Aoyama might have already left the world of moon and star. After all, so much time has passed. If he doesn't leave now, he'll probably be done for once the gateway opens and the elders of the Radiant Saint Hall pour out. Jianqin said calmly, "That's just your guess. And what if Aoyama hasn't left?" "Changyang, I think it's safer if we hide further away." Donglin Yen Shui was worried. "All right then, let's continue on our way." Jianqin was helpless. In order to avoid Donglin Yen Shui's suspicions, he could only continue flying further away with Donglin Yen Shui in his arms. Now, Donglin Yen Shui was no longer as resistant to Jianqin as before. When Jianqin carried her, she actually experienced a strange feeling. Time passed silently. Unknowingly, a year had passed since the trial of the 5 candidates had ended. Over a dozen elders stood in a row in the sacred hall of the Radiant Saint Hall with Elder Mu Zhong at the lead. They stood in an imposing manner on the stage. Of course, as a peak organization that stood on the desolate plain, the Radiant Saint Hall definitely possessed more than that. The elders on the stage right now were only a portion of them. Below the stage gathered the lords of the various peaks, as well as a few hallowed Saint Masters who were not the Divine King, but possessed extraordinary statuses. To no surprise, Jianqin's junior sister, Baiyu, was one of them. A year has finally passed. Senior brother is finally going to emerge from the world of moon and star. I wonder what kind of world it is. Once he comes out, I have to ask him properly. Baiyu stood among the crowd as she stared at Elder Mu Zhong. Her face was filled with eagerness and slight excitement. I now announce that the 1-year trial of the world of moon and star has officially ended. Of the 5 candidates who participated in the trial, which 3 will be eliminated will be decided by the radiant origin pearls they obtain. Now, open the gateway to the world of moon and star. With Elder Mu Zhong's call, The ancient seal in his hand immediately pulsed with powerful energy. He swung it at the sky, and the space there immediately pulsed. It twisted and formed a gateway. The gateway to the world of moon and star has already been opened. Why haven't the candidates returned yet? Elder Muzhong called out. His old voice boomed through the gateway, echoing through the world of moon and star, and echoing through 1,000,000 kilometers. Elder Muzhong was the most senior elder in the Radiant Saint Hall. Not only was he respected, but he was also one of the 3 most powerful people among the elders. He was equivalent to a 9th heavenly layer infinite prime among fighters. His status was only second to the 8 vice leaders. With the opening of the gateway, all the radiant god kings gathered below the stage looked towards the gateway in the sky as they discussed among themselves. It's finally over. I just wonder which 2 out of the 5 candidates, Jianshin, Xanbin, Shurda, and Donglin Yenshui, will advance to the next round and compete for the position of chosen saint. Does it even need to be said? It'll definitely be Jianshin and Xanbin. After all, the 2 of them reached late 4-colored Sulcor, first out of the 5 candidates. That's not necessarily the case. Although Jianshin and Xanbin were the first to reach late 4-colored Sulcor, and Shurda aren't weak either. They also have late 4-colored Sulcors. How can you forget about Donglin Yenshui? Don't forget that Donglin Yenshui's strength soared in the last 2 years. She basically broke through a minor level of cultivation every year. In just 2 short years, she went from early 4-colored Sulcor to late 4-colored Sulcor. That's completely unreasonable. Donglin Yenshui's sudden increase in strength is probably due to some external help. Her foundation is nowhere near as solid as Jianshin and Xanbin's. The 2 of them can't be compared. Don't forget that there's still Changyang by Donglin Yenshui's side. Although Changyang's cultivation is low, he's a subordinate of Vice Leader Xianzhan, who knows what trump cards he's hiding. If he assists Donglin Yenshui with his full strength, who knows who among the 5 candidates will be able to achieve an outstanding result in the first round? As they waited silently, the many radiant god kings began an intense discussion around the 5 candidates. The dozen or so temple elders in the arena also turned their gazes towards the world of moon and star's realm gate with anticipation. Time passed, second by second. The gate to the world of moon and star opened wide, but unexpectedly, no one came out from inside. Something's wrong. Elder Muzhong frowned. His old eyes shone with light as he stared fixedly at the gate of the world of moon and star. Such an abnormal scene made him feel uneasy. Elder Lu Shui, Elder Xiaofeng, the 2 of you enter the world of moon and star quickly to check on the situation. Elder Muzhong called out to the 2 elders beside him. Immediately, the 2 elders flew into the air. The laws of the hallowed descended, and with a flash, they vanished into the gateway. At this moment, the peak masters gathered around the arena seemed to have realized that something was wrong. They all became quiet and stared at the world of moon and star's world gate without blinking. Very soon, Elder Lu Shui and Elder Xiaofeng returned. The 2 of them landed on the ring with ugly expressions and said with a heavy voice, "This is bad. We can't sense Elder He Tian's presence, and we found traces of battle and blood from Elder He Tian nearby. Elder He Tian is most likely dead." Chapter 2386. Elder Muzhong was not the only one. Even the other elders on the stage had lost their usual indifference at this moment. All of their faces had become extremely ugly, and their faces were filled with graveness. That's impossible. We've already cleared out all the vicious beasts in the world of moon and star. We've slain all the primordial realm vicious beasts, leaving behind only a few existences at the level of the Divine King. It's impossible for these vicious beasts to pose a threat to He Tian. That's right. It's impossible for the vicious beasts in the world of moon and star to pose a threat to He Tian. Even if a vicious beast breaks through and reaches the primordial realm, It's impossible for them to be Hition's opponent. What has happened in the world of moon and star? Why haven't we received any messages from Elder Hition? Has something happened in the world of moon and star such that even Elder Hition was unable to contact us in time? Oh no, the 5 candidates are still in the world of moon and star. In the arena, many elders shouted one after another. Their expressions changed rapidly and became extremely solemn. They had a bad premonition in their hearts. All elders enter the world of moon and star. Even if you have to dig deep, you have to find out what has happened. Search the entire world of moon and star. You have to find the candidates participating in the trial. If they're alive, I want to see them. If they're dead, I want to see their corpses. Go! Elder Mu Zhong bellowed out. His face was ashen, and he had basically flown into a rage. The chosen saint of the Radiant Saint Hall was chosen once every 1,000 years. This was an ancient tradition that had lasted for countless years. Now that all the candidates had entered the world of moon and star to undergo the trial, the final chosen saint would be chosen. If the 5 of them all met with misfortune in the world of moon and star, would that not mean that the Radiant Saint Hall would not have a chosen saint this time? Although this would not affect the Radiant Saint Hall's strength at all. The Radiant Saint Hall was a famed peak organization on the desolate plain after all. If they really ended up in an awkward situation where they did not have a chosen saint, it would be an extremely humiliating matter for the Radiant Saint Hall. Immediately, apart from Elder Mu Zhong, all the elders on the stage entered the world of moon and star. The huge square immediately fell silent. All the divine king gathered here realized that something unexpected had probably happened in the world of moon and star this time. They all stood below the ring and waited silently. The atmosphere was rather oppressive. Before long, 2 elders flew out from the gateway of the world of moon and star. One of them held a bloody corpse in his hand. They carefully placed the body on the stage and said with grief and indignation, "Elder Hition has fallen." The corpse was none other than Elder Hition, who had guarded the world of moon and star as the final line of defense for the 5 candidates participating in the trial. Oh no! Elder Mu Zhong's heart sank when he saw Elder Hition's body. His old face became extremely stern, and he immediately sent a strand of his soul into the depths of the sacred hall. Very soon, several temple elders flew out from within and landed on the stage. The elders wore black clothes. Their faces were cold, and their eyes shone with cold light. They were the upper echelon of the disciplinary hall and disciplinary hall. Its martial soul force. Elder Hition has been killed by someone from the martial soul lineage. From the wounds, it's probably Aoyama from the martial soul lineage. Out of the 7 people from the martial soul lineage, only Aoyama could fight against Hition for so long before killing him. The upper echelon of the disciplinary hall and disciplinary hall said emotionlessly. Their voices were cold, and their eyes shone with heavy killing intent. Another elder of our Radiant Saint Hall has died to Aoyama's hands. Let's go and investigate the world of moon and star carefully, said an elder of the disciplinary hall sternly. Aoyama has committed heinous crimes. We can't spare him. The elders of the disciplinary hall and disciplinary hall also entered the world of moon and star as their killing intent surged. It was also at this moment that elders constantly entered and exited the world of moon and star, bringing out corpses one after another. These corpses all belonged to the Divine King of Light. He was one of the protectors of the 5 candidates, and they had all died to Aoyama's hands. The corpses were originally scattered across the world of moon and star, but under the personal search of the elders of the Radiant Saint Hall, they found them one by one. Elder Mu Zhong's face became even more sunken as he watched more and more corpses pile up on the stage. Fury and terrifying killing intent surged in his heart. Giant Shin is dead. At this moment, another elder flew out of the world gate with a corpse. He was heavy-hearted. To no surprise, the corpse belonged to one of the 5 candidates, Giant Shin. Heavens, it's actually Jianshin. Jianshin is actually dead. The news of Jianshin's death immediately caused an uproar below the stage. Senior brother, you have to be safe. You have to come back alive. Bai Yu paled in the crowd. She clenched her fists tightly as she prayed inside. She was filled with worry. Everyone could tell that something huge had happened to the world of Moon and Star this time. Even she could not guarantee that her senior brother would make it out alive. Suddenly, a terrifying pressure permeated the surroundings. Two figures appeared silently on the stage. They were Xianzhan and Mo, he of the 8 vice leaders of the Radiant Saint Hall. Greetings to the vice leaders. Their appearance immediately caused all the Radiant God Kings below to bow. Even Elder Mu Zhong did the same as everyone else, bowing. Xianzhan and Mo, he stared at the corpses on the stage without blinking at all. Their faces were sunken. The vice leaders were supreme figures in the Radiant Saint Hall. They rarely showed themselves. Even something as important as the selection of the chosen saint was completely left to the elders. The vice leaders would not interfere personally. At most, they would observe from behind the scenes. But now, with so many guardians dying as well as the prospective saint's death, even the high and mighty vice palace master was alarmed. At this moment, many elders radiated with powerful presences in the world of Moon and Star. They flew through the air with lightning-like speed. Powerful senses of the soul pierced through the sky and ground, sweeping through the entire world of Moon and Star. All the ferocious beasts that lived in the world of Moon and Star, regardless of whether they were strong or weak, were all cowering in their own caves, trembling in fear. Chapter 2387. Now, Donglin Yen Shui had gradually calmed down from her initial uneasiness. Aoyama had not found her after all this time, so she firmly believed that Aoyama had already left. She firmly believed that she could leave this place alive. Changyang, how much longer until the 1-year period ends? Donglin Yen Shui asked gently. Jianshin had always been by her side during the year of hardship. He had truly gone through life and death with her, which made Donglin Yen Shui develop a special feeling for Jianshin. As a matter of fact, she even developed a slight reliance on him. It should be soon, Jianshin said leisurely. He remained composed the entire time. This was something he showed naturally. However, he had no idea that the presence he had unconsciously displayed had instead established a great figure in Donglin Yen Shui's heart. At this moment, the cave where Jianshin and Donglin Yen Shui hid suddenly shook violently. The thick layer of soil above them was suddenly blown away by a powerful force. Powerful radiant saint force shone with extremely bright light, causing the gloomy cave to become as bright as day in a single instant. High up in the sky, a middle-aged woman wearing a white robe was floating in the air, looking down from a high vantage point. Even though she was currently high and mighty, she did not reveal the slightest trace of arrogance. Instead, her gaze was tightly fixed on the ground below, and she clearly breathed a sigh of relief. Master! Donglin Yen Shui raised her head instinctively. When she saw the middle-aged woman hovering in the sky, she immediately became excited. She cried out and wanted to stand up. However, she had yet to recover from her wounds, so she had already lost the ability to move. Not only did she fail to stand up, but she even staggered and almost fell over. Fortunately, Jianshan reacted quickly and caught her in time. The middle-aged woman was one of the elders of the Radiant Saint Hall, as well as Donglin Yen Shui's master, Mu Shui. With a flash, Mu Shui appeared before Donglin Yen Shui in a single instance. She was unable to contain her excitement as she said in joy, "It's good that you're alive. It's good that you're alive." I thought, as if Donglin Yen Shui had found her only support, she hugged Mu Shui tightly and said with a sobbing voice, "Master." Aoyama of the martial soul lineage appeared soon after we entered the world of Moon and Star. He hunted us down, so I thought I would never see you again. I know. Yen Shui, you don't have to be afraid now. We've already sent many elders into the world of moon and star. They're searching for Aoyama everywhere. Once we find Aoyama, he'll definitely die, Mu Shuei said softly. Mu Shuei said gently, but Jian Qin could clearly hear the heavy killing intent in her voice. Clearly, this was killing intent targeted towards Aoyama. Not only had Aoyama ruined the once-in-a-millennium selection of chosen saint of the Radiant Saint Hall when he barged into the world of moon and star this time, he had even caused heavy casualties to the 5 candidates. This had already infuriated the Radiant Saint Hall. Let's go. You're heavily injured, but you'll recover very quickly once we return to the Sacred Hall, Mu Shuei said to Donglin Yanxue. Afterwards, she glanced at the silent Jianqin, who stood to one side. She became slightly friendlier. Chongyang, thank you for taking care of Yan Shui during these birthdays. Afterwards, Jianqin and Donglin Yanxue left the world of moon and star under Mu Shui's lead, returning to the Radiant Saint Hall. Many corpses had already piled up on the huge stage in the Radiant Saint Hall. Not only were there over 30 divine king corpses, but there were even 3 corpses of candidates. Out of the 5 candidates, Jianqin, Shida, and Endao were completely dead. Only Donglin Yanxue and Xianbin's fates remained unknown. At this moment, the atmosphere in the huge Radiant Saint Hall was extremely stifling. Even the 2 vice leaders, Xianzhan and Emohi, had pale white faces. At this moment, another elder flew out of the world of moon and star with a corpse. He gently placed the corpse on the stage and said with a pained expression, Xianbin is dead as well. Xianzhan and Emohi's gazes sharpened at that moment. At that moment, everyone could clearly sense a terrifying killing intent that could devastate the world brew within the 2 vice leaders. However, Elder Mu Zhong's face became extremely sorrowful. He murmured in a daze, "For of the 5 candidates have already died. It looks like something has happened to Donglin Yanxue as well. Is our Radiant Saint Hall really going to be without a chosen saint this time? No, not all of the 5 candidates are dead." At this moment, a voice rang out from the gateway. The elder Mu Shuei flew out. Beside her were Jianqin and Donglin Yanxue, who were surrounded by Radiant Saint Force. Yanxue is still alive. Mu Shuei directly arrived on the stage with Jianqin and Donglin Yanxue. The Radiant Saint Force dispersed, and Jianqin and Donglin Yanxue were immediately exposed before everyone. As soon as he saw Donglin Yanxue, Elder Mu Zhong's despair-filled eyes immediately lit up with a wondrous light again. Even Vice Hall Master Xianzhan and Emohi's expressions softened a little. Clearly, in their eyes, the loss of the Divine King was nowhere near as valuable as a candidate. After all, once the Radiant Saint Hall lost a chosen saint, the ancient tradition that had lasted for countless years would be broken in this generation. The loss of face to the Radiant Saint Hall would be immeasurable. Before long, the elders found the second group of survivors after Jianqin and Donglin Yanxue. They were the 3 divine king of Radiant Saint Hall. They hid extremely far away in the world of moon and star, so they managed to avoid the disaster. Of course, the 3 of them only managed to survive because Aoyama had purposefully spared them. He wanted to reduce the suspicion towards Jianqin and Donglin Yanshue's survival. Afterwards, the world of moon and star was completely handed over to the experts of the disciplinary hall and disciplinary hall to investigate. They wanted to find how Aoyama had entered the world of moon and star. As for Jianqin and Donglin Yanxue, as well as the 3 other divine king of Radiant Saint Hall, elders personally went to find them to understand the situation. Chapter 2388. Jianqin only had a 1-colored soul core, so they naturally did not ask him too much. The elders all believed that the 3 surviving divine king were the ones who could help them understand the situation better. Fantastic. Second senior brother, you've actually made it out of the world of moon and star alive. You have no idea. I saw so many powerful lords of the various peaks die in the world of moon and star, so I thought even you would not be able to survive." As soon as Jianqin emerged from the sacred hall, Baiyu immediately appeared beside him. Her delicate and beautiful face was filled with lingering fear. "Oh, right. Second senior brother, what happened in the world of moon and star? Did you really come across Aoyama of the martial soul lineage?" Baiyu raised her head slightly as she looked at Jianqin. Her eyes were filled with curiosity. "Why do you care about that? You better cultivate properly. Becoming stronger as soon as possible is the most important thing." "I'm just curious. Second senior brother, just tell me. Originally, the trial in the world of moon and star was only the first step to the competition between the candidates. In this step, the candidates would obtain the most radiant origin pearls and directly eliminate 3 of them. Only 2 candidates would emerge victorious in the end. The second step was for the 2 remaining candidates to continue competing and decide on the final candidate. Only then would it come to a perfect conclusion. However, due to the sudden changes in the world of moon and star, only Donglin Yen Shui survived out of the 5 candidates. As a result, Donglin Yen Shui became the only candidate in the Radiant Saint Hall. As a result, the second step was naturally nullified. As a result, Donglin Yen Shui formally became the chosen saint of the Radiant Saint Hall. Once she became the chosen saint, not only would her status increase, but she would also receive the full support of the Radiant Saint Hall for the next 1,000 years. As a result, the position of chosen saint was an irresistible temptation to all Radiant Saint Masters in the Radiant Saint Hall. It was an opportunity for them to undergo a drastic metamorphosis. Under the assistance of the elders, Donglin Yen Shui recovered from her wounds in less than a day. 3 days later, the grand ceremony for the chosen saint officially took place. When Donglin Yen Shui became the chosen saint, Jianqin had already returned to the Soaring Clouds Peak. He sat there as he stared at the sacred hall that stood above the clouds in the distance. His eyes were deep. Basically, 99% of the low-level Radiant Saint Masters in the Radiant Saint Hall have had their blood tested and obtained a blood medallion as an identity medallion. The examination of the blood medallion in the Radiant Saint Hall is becoming stricter and stricter, so it's gradually becoming an identity medallion. "It looks like I really don't have much time left in the Radiant Saint Hall," Jianqin thought as he sat on a large rock outside his dwelling. His comprehension of the laws of space had already reached the God King realm, so his understanding of space was extremely deep. Even without using the power of his soul, he could still see through the clouds with his naked eye and see the scene 1,000,000 kilometers away. As a result, although he did not take a single step away from the Soaring Clouds Peak in the past 3 days, many things that happened in the Radiant Saint Hall could not be hidden from him. He could clearly see the blood medallions on all the Radiant Saint Masters. He could also clearly see the envoys of the Radiant Saint Hall inspecting the blood medallions of all the low-level Radiant Saint Masters under the supervision of the cultivators from outside. Anyone who had not undergone the blood test would be forcefully taken away regardless of their identity or background. At that moment, he truly felt a sense of urgency. He was running out of time. At this moment, Jianqin's face changed slightly. He saw 3 envoys in black robes and a cultivator in azure robes in the distance. They directly made their way to the Soaring Clouds Peak. Jianqin was extremely familiar with this group of people. They were one of the groups responsible for inspecting the blood medallions. "I can't run into them." Jianqin quickly made up his mind. He floated down from the rock and concealed his presence. He left through the back of the Soaring Clouds Peak to avoid them. Soon after Jianqin's departure, the group of 4 arrived outside the Soaring Clouds Peak. One of the envoys asked, "Is the disciple of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Changyang, present? Why are you looking for senior brother?" At this moment, a white streak of light shot over and stopped before the 4 of them, revealing Baiyu. Baiyu had just come down from the sacred hall and was about to come to the soaring clouds peak to find Jianqin, but she just happened to come across the group of enforcers. Changyang still hasn't undergone the blood test, so we've obviously come to carry out our duties, said one of the envoys. Oh, I just happen to want to discuss my experiences with senior brother as well. Let's go together. Baiyu nodded and appeared before Jianqin's dwelling with the 4 envoys. Baiyu directly touched the formation outside the dwelling and called for Jianqin from outside. Obviously, she received no reply. Strange. Is senior brother not on the soaring clouds peak? Or is he cultivating in seclusion? A while later, Baiyu frowned and murmured to herself. The 3 envoys and the outsider only stood nearby quietly. They did not become impatient at all. If that's the case, let's wait here. All the disciples below the Divine King in the Radiant Saint Hall have undergone the blood test. We're only missing Changyang, said one of the envoys. In the past, they definitely would not have had the patience to wait here. As a matter of fact, they would have broken through the formation and forced their way in. However, ever since Jianqin's identity as vice leader Xian Zhan's medallion was exposed a year ago, his status in the Radiant Saint Hall had changed. These envoys naturally would not offend Jianqin over such a small matter. Jianqin hid in the clouds several dozen kilometers away. He saw everything that happened on the soaring clouds peak clearly. With his powerful senses, he heard everything the envoys said. His face immediately became stern. I never thought that I would be the last one. I can't return to the soaring clouds peak either, Jianqin thought to himself. Jianqin frowned. After a moment of thought, he suddenly looked at the sacred hall that stood above the clouds. Afterwards, he took off and flew towards the sacred hall. When Jianqin arrived at the sacred hall, the ceremony for Donglin Yen Shui's coronation had already ended. The lords of the various peaks gathered on the square had all dispersed. Jianqin held vice leader Xian Zhan's medallion and moved through the heavily guarded sacred hall without any obstructions. He directly found Donglin Yen Shui's temporary residence. Even peak lords were forbidden from approaching where the chosen saint lived without permission. However, with Jianqin's medallion, he could even see vice leader Xian Zhan at any time, let alone where the chosen saint lived. It had to be mentioned that after becoming the chosen saint, Donglin Yen Shui's treatment had clearly improved. 2 female disciples stood to the left and right of her temporary residence, awaiting her orders at all times. Chapter 2389. But this is the residence of Her Highness. The 2 female attendants at the entrance were troubled. They had no idea how to turn him down. The 2 of them were hallowed saint masters with 5 colored soul cores. They were equivalent to gods, but Changyang, who only had a 1-colored soul core, was extremely cautious. They were afraid of offending him. Clearly, they knew that although Jianqin's cultivation was low, he had the support of a vice leader. His status was extraordinary. At this moment, the door to the residence opened, and Donglin Yen Shui walked out slowly in her attire. She looked at Jianqin outside, and a sliver of mixed feelings flashed through her eyes. After a moment of hesitation, she sent the 2 female attendants away and said softly, "Changyang, come in." With that, Donglin Yen Shui turned around and left. However, the moment she turned around, her face became slightly unnatural, but it vanished very soon. Jianqin did not think too much about it. He directly entered Donglin Yen Shui's residence and closed the door behind him. "Why have you come to find me?" The light in Donglin Yen Shui's dark eyes flickered as she looked at Jianqin. "When can I enter the Tower of Radiance?" Jianqin directly asked. "Have you come to find me just for the Tower of Radiance? Is there nothing else?" Donglin Yen Shui stared straight at Jianqin and replied with a question. "The Tower of Radiance is extremely important to me because the cultivation methods and comprehensions of the seniors in there will directly affect my future accomplishments. As a result, if possible, I hope to enter the Tower of Radiance as soon as possible, Jianqin said seriously. Is the Tower of Radiance the only thing in your eyes? A sliver of disappointment flashed through Donglin Yanshue's eyes. Jianqin was slightly surprised by that. He glanced at Donglin Yanshue deeply and said, Indeed, in order to obtain a spot to enter the Tower of Radiance, you must know just how much effort I've put in. Changyang, Donglin Yanshue called out. She stared at Jianqin closely with her limpid eyes, and her voice became slightly louder. She said rather hurriedly, I really don't understand. You clearly have the Vice Leader's medallion. If you want to enter the Tower of Radiance, you can ask the Vice Leader to open it for you. Although other Vice Leaders will face some resistance when they want to open the Tower of Radiance, Vice Leader Xian Zhan's status in the Radiant Saint Hall is only a single person of his will be able to open it. Since you're in such a hurry to enter the Tower of Radiance, why are you looking for me of all places? You've even taken out an extremely precious pure soul. I only obtained Vice Leader Xian Zhan's medallion a few days before the world of Moon and Star opened. At the same time, I don't want to owe Vice Leader Xian Zhan too much. As a result, even though I know Vice Leader Xian Zhan can directly let me into the Tower of Radiance, I don't want to trouble him. I want to obtain a spot to enter through my own efforts, said Jianqin. Donglin Yanshue looked at Jianqin with mixed feelings. For a moment, she actually said nothing. Even though Jianqin's current appearance was a common face that had been altered by a mask, the type that would not raise any attention at all if he was thrown into a crowd, his common face had already left a great impression in Donglin Yanshue's heart. A person's beauty was not determined by their appearance. Instead, it was determined by their heart. Only when a person's heart was beautiful could they be regarded as truly beautiful. However, Jianqin's behavior in the world of Moon and Star seemed to have allowed Donglin Yanshue to truly see his heart. As a result, he was a tall, handsome, and extraordinary figure in Donglin Yanshue's heart. A while later, Donglin Yanshue sighed gently. A faint sense of disappointment silently permeated her heart. In half a month, I will be using the privilege to open the Tower of Radiance. I'll send someone to contact you then. Half a month? Jianqin frowned when he heard that. He said, That's too long. Can you do it earlier? The sooner, the better. It's best if it's tomorrow. Tomorrow? Why are you in such a hurry? Donglin Yanshue was surprised. Yeah, because of some reasons it's rather urgent. Donglin Yanshue, just treat it as you helping me out this time. I will remember this favor, Jianqin said seriously. Donglin Yanshue was actually unable to turn down Jianqin at all when she saw how stern he was. She said, All right, tomorrow it is. Donglin Yanshue set the schedule for the opening of the Tower of Radiance, just like that. The next day, the sun rose. It was fiery, dyeing the clouds and mist in the mountains red. On the highest floor of the Radiant Saint Hall, a group of people stood before a tower that was only a few hundred meters tall. Donglin Yanshue led the group of people to stand there quietly. To no surprise, Jianqin was among them as well. Aside from him, there were 8 other Divine King of Radiance. They stood in a line with Jianqin, standing behind Donglin Yanshue, silently. The 8 Divine King of Radiance were the new protectors that Donglin Yanshue had chosen. During the 1,000 years since Donglin Yanshue had become the chosen saint, the protectors had taken the protection of the chosen saint as their mission. They were completely under Donglin Yanshue's lead, and they would listen to her orders. Jianqin raised his head slightly and studied the white tower before him curiously. The White Tower was naturally the treasure of the Radiant Saint Hall, the Tower of Radiance. Its entire body was silvery white, and it seemed to have a natural beauty. No one could find the slightest flaw in it. Although it was a powerful treasure left behind by a Grand Exalt, it did not give off any pressure at all. As a result, Jianqin and the others were unable to connect it to a Grand Exalt when they stood before it. Don't underestimate this place. As the highest floor of the sacred hall, the entire space here is filled with supreme formations. It said that the previous leaders went through great difficulty to get the Grand Exalt of ancient paths to cast down a Grand Exalt level formation. It keeps the Tower of Radiance firmly locked here and prevents any experts from coveting the Tower of Radiance. Donglin Yen Shue's voice rang out in Jianqin's head. Jianqin nodded slightly. He studied every inch of space carefully. Indeed, he discovered that there seemed to be a shocking formation around the Tower of Radiance. The formation was extremely well hidden. If it were not for the fact that Jianqin's soul had mutated due to the fusion of chaotic force, he would not have been able to sense its existence at all. Donglin Yen Shui, have you thought it through? Do you really want to open the Tower of Radiance at a time like this? The privilege of opening the Tower of Radiance will be reduced every time you use it. At this moment, Elder Mu Zhong appeared silently. He stared at Donglin Yen Shui with shining eyes. Esteemed Elder Mu Zhong, Yen Shui has already made up her mind. She will officially use the privilege of opening the Tower of Radiance, Donglin Yen Shui said without any hesitation. Elder Mu Zhong nodded and said nothing more. In the next moment, the two tremendous and terrifying energies turned into torrents that descended from space. They poured into the Tower of Radiance with terrifying pressure. The Tower of Radiance immediately shone brightly. Vaguely, the Grand Exalt's formation around the Tower of Radiance seemed to change slowly, causing the invisible formation that blocked the entrance to the Tower of Radiance to disperse like water, revealing the entrance to the Tower of Radiance. Vice Leader Xinjian and Vice Leader Mo, he have already opened the Tower of Radiance for you. Hurry up and get in. Elder Mu Zhong shouted. Chapter 2390. With Elder Mu Zhong's call, Donglin Yen Shui immediately made her way towards the Tower of Radiance. Very soon, she vanished through the entrance. After Donglin Yen Shui, the 8 protectors who had been chosen temporarily arrived. They were all devout as they entered in a single line. As Jianqin was the weakest person here, he was naturally the last one to enter. He's in such a hurry to enter the Tower of Radiance with a one-colored soul core. It looks like this child is an impatient person. It'll be difficult for him to amount to anything great in the future with a mindset like that. Elder Mu Zhong stared at Jianqin's figure as he gradually vanished into the Tower of Radiance. He secretly shook his head. The Tower of Radiance was a hazy, gray world. It was difficult to see. A faint, gray mist permeated the entire space, obstructing one's vision. He could only see 100 meters away. The ground below him was desolate. It was deathly silent. Jianqin frowned slightly as he looked at the miniature world of the Tower of Radiance. Ever since he entered the Tower of Radiance, he felt pressured. He actually felt like his life was no longer under his control. Moreover, he could sense that the gray mist in the surroundings was actually seeping into his body, strand by strand. He could sense a heavy presence of death from the gray mist. The gray mist is the resentment of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Once too much of the resentment invades your body, it will cause severe damage and even affect your mind. As a result, you can't stay here for too long. Once you can't last any longer, you have to retreat, Jianqin said with a solemn expression. Donglin Yen Shui looked back at Jianqin and explained in detail to Jianqin. Physical injuries are nothing to our Radiant Saint Hall. No matter how severe they are, they can recover in the shortest amount of time. However, once the resentment seeps into your soul and affects your mind, it'll be far too severe. This is because injuries to the soul are extremely troublesome even to our Radiant Saint Hall. Jianqin nodded, indicating that he understood, and said, Then where are the cultivation methods and secret techniques left by the seniors? Many ancient imprints hover in this space. Every single ancient imprint was left behind by past experts of our Radiant Saint Hall. Every single ancient imprint represents a cultivation method, a divine technique, or the cultivation notes left behind by past seniors. However, obtaining these ancient imprints has nothing to do with strength. Instead, it It completely depends on one's talent and luck. Donglin Yen Shui stared at Jianqin and explained in detail. Close your eyes, open your heart, and use your heart to respond. Once you are lucky enough, the ancient seals floating here will automatically find you and transmit the contents recorded within to you. Jianqin immediately tried using Donglin Yen Shui's method. He was suppressed by the remnant consciousness of the artifact spirit in the Tower of Radiance, as well as the influence of the Tower of Radiance itself. So both the senses of his soul and the senses of his senses had been weakened to the lowest point. They were no longer of much use. As a result, he could only follow Donglin Yen Shui's method. Jianqin was no ordinary person. The fact that he could comprehend the laws of the hallowed with a one-colored soul core demonstrated just how great his talent was. He had completely surpassed Donglin Yen Shui long ago. As a result, when he opened his heart and called with his heart, he sensed the existence of the 3 ancient imprints very soon. Of course, this was not because of his senses. Instead, the mental connection between the 3 ancient imprints was responding to him, actively contacting him. It was exactly because of this that Jianqin could sense the existence of the 3 ancient imprints accurately. The 3 ancient imprints flew through the space aimlessly at terrifying speeds in Jianqin's senses. They would be in the sky at times and underground at other times. They would appear 10,000 kilometers away in a flash, as if they could pierce through space. Even if Jianqin erupted with his full strength, he would not necessarily be able to catch up to them. Seeing how Jianqin had already begun calling for the ancient imprints, determination suddenly appeared in Donglin Yen Shui's eyes. She waved her hand at the 8 protectors behind her and said secretly, "You guys go first. You guys go ahead, don't worry about me. Your Highness, our responsibilities." A divine king said hesitantly, but before he could finish, he was interrupted by Donglin Yen Shui. "Don't worry, I won't come across any danger here for the time being. Changyang, on the other hand, only has a one-colored soul core, so he won't be able to stay here for long. Once he can't last any longer, I'll send him out and I'll come find you." Hearing this, the 8 guardians looked at each other, hesitated for a moment, and then left together. The Tower of Radiance was also a sacred land that had great fortuitous encounters to them. It could even allow them to change their fates and become successful. They did not want to waste even a single second here. They urgently sought out their own fortuitous encounters. Strange. Why is Her Highness so concerned about Changyang? After all, Changyang is still Her Highness protector in name, yet it's Her Highness who's protecting him now. To think that you've lived for so long. Can't you tell? The chosen saint has clearly developed feelings for Changyang. How is that possible? Changyang only has a one-colored soul core. Apart from Vice Leader Xianzhan's support, I really can't find anything good about him. There are countless people who pursue Her Highness in the Radiant Saint Hall. They're all geniuses, far more than Changyang can compare to. How is it possible for Her Highness to fall in love with him? I find it unbelievable as well. According to my understanding of Her Highness, she wasn't like this in the past. However, ever since she emerged from the world of moon and star, she seemed to have become a completely different person. The 8 protectors had already left. Donglin Yen Shui stared at Jianqin's ordinary face with her eyes wide open. She seemed to remember everything she had gone through with Jianqin in the world of moon and star. Her gaze gradually became gentle. 3 black-robed elders sat in a majestic hall in the disciplinary hall of the Radiant Saint Hall. They were all stern. "We've completed the preliminary investigation of the world of moon and star. The only thing I don't understand is how Changyang and Donglin Yen Shui managed to escape alive after meeting Aoyama. That's rather unbelievable. I've also checked the scene. Although there are traces of battle between vicious beasts, it's still not enough for Changyang and Donglin Yen Shui to escape from Aoyama. It's just that Changyang is Vice Leader Xianzhan's subordinate. We'll have our hands tied when it comes to Changyang. We can't use any special methods at all. If we end up offending Vice Leader Xianzhan, we'll lose more than we gain. The 3 elders of the Law Enforcement Hall all sighed. They seemed to be in a difficult position. Chapter 2391. Within the sacred hall, Vice Leader Xianzhan walked out of his residence in simple white robes with his hands behind his back. A heavy pressure radiated from him. Opposite Vice Leader Xianzhan was a black-robed elder from the sacred hall. He had already broken through to the 7-colored soul core and condensed a soul tree. He bowed slightly as he reported the situation. The elder happened to be one of the upper echelon of the disciplinary hall. Are you saying that Changyang is hiding some unknown secret? Or is there something wrong with Changyang? A gleam of light immediately flashed through Xianzhan's eyes when he heard the elder's report. I wouldn't dare to be so presumptuous. I just feel that it's a little unreasonable for Changyang and Her Highness to be able to escape from Aoyama. This is because the 2 of them have already encountered Aoyama. Even if a powerful, vicious beast had appeared along the way and kept Aoyama busy, Aoyama would have been able to catch up to the 2 of them with his strength after killing the vicious beast. Even the Divine King of Light would not have been able to escape from Aoyama's pursuit, let alone Changyang and Her Highness, who are much slower than the Divine King of Light. Just from this alone, it's impossible for Changyang and Her Highness to escape from Aoyama, unless Aoyama purposefully spared them. Although 3 other Divine Kings of Light have survived, they have not encountered Aoyama. As a result, it can be understood that even Aoyama is unable to find where they are hiding. It's completely different from Changyang and Her Highness' situation. The elder reported everything he knew to Vice Leader Xianzhan. Afterwards, he carefully glanced at Vice Leader Xianzhan's face. After a moment of hesitation, he continued, "Aside from that, I also have a feeling that—" The elder hesitated as if he was worried. He did not know whether he should say it or not. "Speak." Vice Leader Xianzhan called out. His expression remained the same. The elder of the Law Enforcement Hall thought for a while and said softly, "This subordinate has carefully observed the scene. Based on this subordinate's many years of experience, I have a feeling that that place seemed to have been deliberately set up by someone, as if to hide something. Of course, this is only my intuition. I haven't gathered any useful evidence yet. Have you tried turning back time and peeking into the past?" asked Vice Leader Xianzhan. The space in the world of moon and star was rather fragile. It was only enough for infinite primes to enter. Experts, like the 8 vice leaders, were unable to enter at all. As a result, they could only go through the elders if they wanted to learn about the situation there. We've asked subjects to try turning back time, but the several dozen places where Aoyama took action in the world of moon and star have all been disrupted by Aoyama. He's interfered with the laws, so turning back time is useless. And there's something else. I've just learned that out of all the disciples below Divine King, only Changyang has yet to undergo a blood test. Even Her Highness has obtained a blood medallion after recovering from her wounds. The elder said carefully. Vice Leader Xianzhan's eyes narrowed. After a moment of thought, he waved his hand and said, "You are dismissed for now. Don't divulge the information you know for now unless the leader asks you personally." "Yes, this lowly one understands." "Then this lowly one will take his leave." The temple elder of the Law Enforcement Hall respectfully retreated. Xianzhan was the most respected out of the 8 vice leaders of the Radiant Saint Hall because he had already reached the peak of his cultivation level. No one knew when he would break through and reach the next level. Now that Vice Leader Xianzhan had personally spoken, the elder dared not tell the other 7 vice leaders what he knew no matter what. After the disciplinary hall elder left, Xianzhan was the only one left in the spacious bedchambers. He stood there proudly with his hand on his arm. With a flip of his hand, the jade bottle that contained a droplet of Xianming's blood that he had obtained from Genshin and the jade slip that Xianming had left behind with a message from Xianming appeared. Xianzhan's gaze deepened as he looked at the 2 items in his hand. The Nine Clouds Plain was one of the 49 Great Plains of the Saints' World. Although its status was nowhere near as great as the famed Seven Sacred Plains, the Nine Clouds Plain still ranked towards the top on the remaining 42 Great Plains and 81 Great Planets. This was because there was an extremely powerful clan on the Nine Clouds Plain, the Heaven-Splitting Clan. The Heaven-Splitting Clan was a peak clan that had truly risen to prominence in the past 3 million years. It had already spread throughout the Saints' World. All of this was because the Heaven-Splitting Clan possessed a supreme expert, only second to Grand Exalts. He was the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor, one of the few peak experts in the Saints' World. He stood on the same level as the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. He was extremely close to the heavenly ways and was only a step away from becoming a Grand Exalt. At this moment, a completely blue divine hall stood silently within the Heaven-Splitting Clan. It gave off a faint pressure. Very few people in the Saints' World did not know about this divine hall because it was the Azure Poseidon Palace that had caused an uproar in the Saints' World several years ago, where more than half of the Supreme Divine King had died. At this moment, the new master of the Azure Poseidon Palace, Xiaoman, sat across from a young man who seemed to be in his 30s with Ziyun. The young man's appearance was nothing special, but his eyes were special. They would shine at times, as if they could see through the heavenly secrets and the wondrous ability to see through all the mysteries of the world. At other times, they would become extremely profound, as if they contained a vast galaxy. As the galaxy revolved, they seemed to be able to devour a person's soul. Although he did not give off the slightest bit of aura, and other than his eye-catching eyes, he appeared to be extremely ordinary. Xiaoman and Ziyun, who sat across from him, appeared to be extremely cautious. They seemed to be extremely afraid of this young man. Even though they were in the Azure Poseidon Palace, Xiaoman's territory, they still did not feel safe at all. You can think about my suggestion carefully. Although the Azure Poseidon Palace is of great quality and extremely powerful, it's not invincible. If you leave here, even more experts will target you, and it'll be very difficult for you to have peace. Only I can protect you, so that those people won't dare to have any thoughts about the Azure Poseidon Palace, said the young man. His voice was very gentle, like a spring breeze. After saying this, the young man's figure quietly disappeared. He's already left the Azure Poseidon Palace. After the young man left, a short old man appeared before Lil Man. He looked at the spot where the young man had been sitting and felt a sense of powerlessness. Artifact Spirit. The Azure Poseidon Palace is a high-quality god artifact. It possesses unbelievable power. Can you really not do anything to that person with the power of the Azure Poseidon Palace? Xiaoman asked. Chapter 2392. The short old man shook his head bitterly. He's the heaven-splitting ancestor. He was at the same level of cultivation as the old master. Even if the blue Poseidon Palace unleashed its full power, it wouldn't be able to stop the heaven-splitting ancestor. Moreover, you know what happened back then. The Neptunian Divine Palace hurtled through outer space, avoiding the peak experts. It was extremely far away from the Nine Clouds Plain where the Heaven-Splitting Clan resides. Yet the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor did not even leave the Nine Clouds Plain. Instead, he brought the Neptunian Divine Palace over from such a great distance. In the hands of someone like that, the Poseidon Palace really is no different from a toy. Are we really going to give him all the Pernite ore? Although what he's offering is very valuable, the Pernite ore is still something our ancestor left behind. Xiaoman was reluctant. The short old man sighed gently. Actually, compared to those annoying fellows who chased us before, the heaven-splitting ancestor is already pretty good. After all, with his strength, if he really wanted to take the Pernite ore from us, we wouldn't have been able to stop him at all. However, not only did he not take it by force, he even offered great conditions in exchange. Of course, the little master has already inherited the Poseidon Palace and obtained the things the old master left behind. Perhaps the little master doesn't care about the things the heaven-splitting ancestor gave her, but the heaven-splitting ancestor's protection is completely different. The protection of an expert, like the heaven-splitting ancestor, is something that can't be bought no matter how many cultivation resources you have. That's what's truly valuable. Once the little master obtains the protection of the heaven-splitting ancestor, you won't have to worry about being harassed at all. Xiao Man fell silent. Although she had obtained the Poseidon Palace and become the new master of the Poseidon Palace, she had not had it easy in the past few years because she was just too weak. As a result, many experts coveted her, and they all began to find her, using both hard and soft tactics in an attempt to control her. Controlling her was equivalent to controlling the Poseidon Palace. However, when some experts discovered that soft tactics did not work, they began to use hard tactics. Therefore, she had not had an easy time during this period of time. It could be said that she was constantly being harassed. Just as the heaven-splitting ancestor had said, the Blue Poseidon Palace was a high-quality god artifact, but it was not invincible. Once its energy ran out and the formation failed, its defenses would plummet. Before the Azure Poseidon Palace accepted a master, the countless experts of the Saints' world did not dare to set their sights on it because of a single sentence from the blood tier Grand Exalt. However, the Azure Poseidon Palace had already accepted a master. To the peak experts, this was a way to avoid the blood tier Grand Exalt's decree and obtain the Azure Poseidon Palace. This was because the blood tier Grand Exalt only told everyone not to snatch the Azure Poseidon Palace. He did not say that they could not rope in the master of the Azure Poseidon Palace. Therefore, in the eyes of many top experts, they felt that whoever could rope in Lil Man would be able to obtain the Azure Poseidon Palace. Roping in was naturally a form of control as well. Xiao Man, we sisters are only where we are today because of Jian Chen's assistance. However, countless experts have trapped Jian Chen on the desolate plain for the sake of the Inata Tower. We have to find a way to help him, said Jian Chen. We have to help him, Zun said from beside Lil Man at this moment. As soon as she thought about Jian Chen's current predicament, she struggled to calm down. Lil Man's eyes immediately lit up. She said firmly, Sister Ziyun is right. If it weren't for Brother Jian Chen's assistance, I probably would have died in the Azure Poseidon Palace long ago, let alone the fact that I would not have been able to retrieve my ancestor's legacy. I have to help Brother Jian Chen now that he's in trouble. I've already made up my mind. I can give all the pernight or on the 8th floor of the Azure Poseidon Palace to Senior Heaven-Splitting Ancestor. But Senior Heaven-Splitting Ancestor must ensure Brother Jian Chen's safety. At the same time, the young man who had appeared in the Azure Poseidon Palace hovered in the air with a heaven-splitting ancestor cultivated in a forbidden grounds of the heaven-splitting clan. He held a thumb-sized black bead in his hand. The ordinary-looking young man who seemed to be in his 30s was the heaven-splitting ancestor who was renowned throughout the Saints' world. The heaven-splitting ancestor looked at the black bead in his hand as undisguised desire and excitement filled his eyes. It was very difficult to imagine just what could tempt the heaven-splitting ancestor so much with his supreme cultivation. I never thought that the soul bead condensed from a fragment of the Grand Exalt of Ancient Path's soul would actually hide such a shocking secret. A terrifying item that doesn't belong to this epoch actually possesses such terrifying power. Once it's refined, even Grand Exalt spirit. The pernight, or in the Azure Poseidon Palace, was actually left there by the experts of the Taoist sect of Neptunia under the orders of the Grand Exalt of Ancient Paths. Since I learnt from the Grand Exalt of Ancient Paths' hazy memories that the pernight ore is one of the materials necessary to refine that item, I have to obtain the pernight ore again, Grand Exalt of Ancient Paths, since you failed to refine that item, and I was fortunate enough to obtain a soul bead condensed from a fragment of your soul, as well as learn the secrets of that item. I'll complete what you failed to do for you. The heaven-splitting ancestor murmured. He stroked the bead lovingly as if he had obtained a supreme treasure. At this moment, the heaven-splitting ancestor's face changed, and he said, "The new master of the Azure Poseidon Palace has agreed to exchange the pernight ore again. Very good. Protect a kid called Jian Chen. It's a piece of cake. Men, what are your orders, ancestor? An old man stood outside the room, politely. He was the heaven-splitting ancestor's servant in the end. Go to the desolate plain and bring me that person called Jianshin, ordered the heaven-splitting ancestor. Do you want the Inata Tower, ancestor? The servant was surprised. The Inata Tower? A smear of disdain appeared on the heaven-splitting ancestor's face. He said, if the Inata Tower was in good condition, I would be slightly interested, but it's damaged now, and it's been sealed by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The price to repair it is just too great. It's not worth becoming enemies with EXAN for a damaged Inata Tower. You only need Jianshin this time. As for the Inata Tower, let the brats on the desolate plain fight for it. Yes, I understand. In the majestic War God Hall on the Godnigma plain, the armored Taita slowly made his way out of a secret room in seclusion. The presence he gave off was so powerful that it had reached the primordial realm. Now, Taita had become an infinite prime. Welcome back, War God. Outside the secret room, 3 old men silently appeared and bowed to Taita. The 3 old men were one of the 3 great elders of the God clan. Their authority was so great that they basically reigned supreme in the God clan. They were only second to the War God. Is there any news of Jianshin? Taita glanced past the 3 great elders and asked like a superior. He was filled with dignity. Chapter 2393. Your Majesty, Jianshin possesses the Inata Tower, which has already attracted the attention of many experts. Many organizations want to steal the Inata Tower from Jianshin and then hand it over to the heavenly palace of Bishing for benefits. Now, Jianshin has already been trapped on the desolate plain. However, his hiding methods are extraordinary. Many experts have searched the desolate plain for 3 or 4 years, but they still haven't found any traces of Jianshin, said a great elder. Although Jianshin was an insignificant figure, what had happened on the desolate plain recently was just too shocking. It had already spread through the saints' world, so many peak experts were familiar with Jianshin's name. It's said that the peak experts gathered on the desolate plain have already begun testing the blood of all the juniors below the Divine King realm. All the Divine King and Infinite Primes will be divined once in an attempt to find Jianshin through this method, said a second great elder. This child is indeed rather special. I tried divining his fate in the past as well. I tried to divine his fate, but in the end, I was unable to divine anything about him at all. If we continue searching like the people on the desolate plain, even if Jianshin is rather special, he'll be found sooner or later, said a third great elder. Taita snorted coldly, and his gaze became piercing. He said sternly, Jianshin is my sworn brother. I will never allow anyone to do anything detrimental to him. Immediately send experts to the desolate plain and warn everyone that anyone who harms my brother will become my enemy, no matter who they are. Yes, we'll get a hall elder to personally head to the desolate plain right away. The 3 great elders who reigned supreme in the God clan did not dare to disobey Taita's words. They all obeyed without any hesitation at all. This was because the War God was a supreme existence in the God clan. No matter how powerful or weak he was, as long as he spoke, it would be an imperial decree. It was truly unquestionable. As a result, even though Taita was only an infinite prime right now, as weak as an ant compared to the 3 great elders, he could directly order them around. Jianshin stood within the Tower of Radiance in the Radiant Saint Hall on the desolate plain with his eyes closed. He called with his heart, constantly deepening his connection with the 3 ancient imprints. The 3 ancient imprints moved through the Tower of Radiance like fish in water. They moved unbelievably fast, where it was impossible to catch up to them. As a result, the only method was to obtain the recognition of the ancient imprints so that they would approach him voluntarily. Finally, under Jianshin's efforts, one of the ancient imprints changed direction and headed towards Jianchen. With a few flashes, a fist-sized ball of light appeared between Jianchen's eyebrows. Strands of ancient consciousness appeared. The ancient imprint had already passed on all the information recorded within to Jianchen. The sword transformation technique. With a thought, Jianchen immediately knew that the ancient imprint recorded a radiant arte. However, only hallowed Saint Masters who had comprehended the laws of the hallowed could grasp this radiant arte. Jianchen could not help but become immersed in his comprehension of the sword transformation technique. At the same time, strands of the laws of the hallowed descended and revolved around him. As he comprehended, the power of the laws of the hallowed that revolved around him began to pulse with a special rhythm. It seemed to condense into the shape of a sword. Donglin Yen Shui stood beside Jianchen and replied to him. The appearance of the laws of the hallowed immediately made her eyes widen. Her face was filled with shock as her heart churned. The laws of the hallowed. This is the laws of the hallowed. He has actually comprehended the laws of the hallowed with a one-colored soul core. How is this possible? Donglin Yen Shui cried out inside. At that moment, she even struggled to believe her eyes. She struggled to believe that this was real. In the Radiant Saint Hall, most of the star geniuses could only comprehend the laws of the hallowed with four-colored soul cores. Only the star geniuses with 5 or more stars could comprehend the laws of the hallowed with 3-colored soul cores and become hallowed Saint Masters. Even a 9-star genius with extraordinary talent like her, as well as the 4 candidates participating in the trial this time, could only comprehend the laws of the hallowed with a 2-colored soul core. However, Changyang had actually become a hallowed Saint Master with a 1-colored soul core. It was not that there were no hallowed Saint Masters with 1-colored soul cores, but that was history from 1,000,000 years ago. This was more than enough to demonstrate just how rare hallowed Saint Masters with 1-colored soul cores were. Changyang is actually already a hallowed Saint Master, and it looks like he has comprehended the laws of the hallowed for quite some time already. A hallowed Saint Master with a 1-colored soul core can be directly promoted to Chosen Saint. There's no need for him to undergo any trials or challenges. Why didn't he do that and give the position of Chosen Saint to me instead? At that moment, Donglin Yen Shui's heart was in a mess. She was at a loss. She deeply understood just how great of an status a hallowed Saint Master with a 1-colored soul core possessed in the Radiant Saint Hall. This was because it represented a supreme genius that had not appeared in the Radiant Saint Hall for 1,000,000 years. At this moment, the ancient imprint that Jianchen passed on the law vanished with a flash. Afterwards, the laws of the hallowed around Jianchen vanished. He slowly opened his eyes and saw Donglin Yen Shui staring at him blankly with a single glance. This immediately stunned Jianchen slightly. However, he suddenly realized that he had used the laws of the hallowed involuntarily when the ancient imprint passed on the law to him. This was not something he could control. It was a completely subconscious action, so he could not hide it even if he wanted to. However, he had only exposed his talent as a Radiant Saint Master, which was not a bad thing for him. Moreover, he was already prepared to leave the Radiant Saint Hall after leaving the Tower of Radiance. As a result, even if his talent was exposed, the upper echelon of the Radiant Saint Hall would not have enough time to investigate his origins. Why? You've actually become a hallowed Saint Master a long time ago. Then why have you always been hiding it? Do you know that if the upper echelon of the Sacred Hall discovered your talent, you would directly become the Chosen Saint? Donglin Yen Shui looked at Jianchen with mixed feelings. I have no interest in the position of Chosen Saint, and I don't plan on staying in the Radiant Saint Hall for long. Jianchen suddenly became stern. He said, Donglin Yen Shui, I hope you can keep this a secret. I don't want too many people to know that I've become a hallowed Saint Master. Why? You want to leave the Radiant Saint Hall. Donglin Yen Shui stared at Jianchen blankly. For some reason, she actually became flustered when she heard that Jianchen wanted to leave the Sacred Hall. Chapter 2394. Jianqin did not answer the question. He closed his eyes and sensed for a while before saying, I just obtained a radiant arte called the sword transformation technique from the ancient imprint. It's just a pity that the sword transformation technique isn't of a high grade. Once I surpass the Divine King, the sword transformation technique will be completely useless. Do you have any methods for me to find higher grade cultivation methods and radiant arts? Donglin Yen Shui sucked in a deep breath and slowly calmed down her churning emotions. She said slowly, the ancient imprints outside are all prepared for disciples below the Divine King because the contents within the imprints just happen to be suitable for disciples at that level. However, there's a sacred pavilion in the depths of the Tower of Radiance. The sacred pavilion is the true soul of our Radiant Saint Hall. It's where all our legacies reside. This is because all the cultivation methods and radiant arts in the sacred pavilion were left behind by experts who had condensed soul trees throughout history. There's even a legend that the sovereign of the world who created the Tower of Radiance, a grand exalt, left his cultivation method in the sacred pavilion. Of course, no one has ever obtained this cultivation method throughout the history of our Radiant Saint Hall, including the various leaders of our Radiant Saint Hall. As a result, the Grand Exalt's cultivation method in the Tower of Radiance has always been a legend. No one has been able to prove its existence. The Grand Exalt's cultivation method. Jianqin's eyes burned with undisguised desire. Clearly, the Grand Exalt's cultivation method was irresistible to him. After all, this was not a cultivation method used by cultivators. If it were a cultivation method practiced by cultivators, even if it was a cultivation method that was even more powerful than a Grand Exalt's cultivation method, he would not be interested at all. This was because he cultivated chaotic force. He had embarked on a completely different path of cultivation. It was already set in stone, so he could not change other cultivation methods. However, Radiant Saint Force was different. Right now, he lacked a cultivation method like that. As a matter of fact, he even went to great lengths to enter the Tower of Radiance. Let's go to the sacred pavilion, Jianqin called out. The sacred pavilion was where he truly wanted to go. Donglin Yen Shui looked at him worriedly and tried to persuade him. The sacred pavilion is in the depths of the Radiant Saint Hall. It'll take some time to get there. Although you've become a hallowed Saint Master, you only have a one-colored soul core after all. You won't be able to last for too long under the corrosion of the grudges. Changyang, the sacred pavilion outside. Although the sacred pavilion, the Radiant Saint Hall's cultivation method, the Radiant Saint Hall. If you want to go to the sacred pavilion, I can't let's go when your strength is higher. I can's radiance of Radiance Saint Halls of the Radiant Saint Hall. Cans of Radiance of Radiance? Saint Radiant and Radiant Saint Chang has a Saint Radiance, a Radiant Saints. Saint after learning that Jianqin was a supreme prodigy that had not appeared in a million years in the Radiant Saint Hall. Jianqin's status in her heart changed once again. Don't worry about me. I'm not as weak as you imagine me to be. Let's go to the sacred pavilion, Jianqin said. He did not care about the grudges that permeated the place at all. Donglin Yen Shui was helpless. She could only lead the way, taking Jianqin to the sacred pavilion in the depths of the Tower of Radiance. Is this the sacred pavilion? 3 days later, Jianqin stood outside a small building completely constructed from white stone as he asked Donglin Yen Shui. Donglin Yen Shui stared at the small building, and a rare sliver of seriousness appeared on her face. She said, "That's right. This is the sacred pavilion. Don't be fooled by its appearance. Although the sacred pavilion seems ordinary from the outside, just like an ordinary stone hut, it's a world of its own inside. Moreover, even the radiant origin pearls in the world of moon and star originated from the sacred pavilion. The sacred pavilion is the center of the Tower of Radiance. It's where the soul of the Tower of Radiance resides." Donglin Yen Shui explained to Jianqin patiently before urging Jianqin, The 8 protectors should have entered the sacred pavilion as well. Let's go in as well. We'll be invaded by vengeful spirits at all times here. So our time here is extremely limited. We can't waste it. Afterwards, Jianqin and Donglin Yen Shui entered the sacred pavilion together. As soon as they entered the sacred pavilion, Jianqin immediately felt like he had entered a different world. However, the world within the sacred pavilion was no different from the outside world. It was also enveloped by a thick, gray mist, and the grudges were everywhere. Jianqin's heart skipped a beat. When he entered the sacred pavilion, he could clearly sense the mental pulses of the sword spirits. The slumbering sword spirits actually slowly awakened. I can sense the presence of my own kind. Master, where is this place? Ziying's voice rang out in Jianqin's head. This is the Tower of Radiance. So this is the Tower of Radiance. The artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance is the same as us, the artifact spirit of Primeval, and the artifact spirit of the Anita Tower. They're all condensed from a power within chaos. They're undying. However, it seems like the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance is a little too miserable. Not only has its body collapsed, but even its consciousness has almost been dispersed. Ziying sighed. They hid in Jianqin's body, so they could clearly sense the situation outside. The artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance is even more miserable than us in the past. It's the one with the most miserable fate out of all our own kind that we've seen. If it weren't for the fact that it's an undying existence, it probably would have dispersed long ago, Qing Suo added. His voice was filled with sympathy. Jianqin's heart shuddered when he heard what the sword spirit said. Are you saying that the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance isn't truly dead? Of course. Qing Suo and I, as well as the artifact spirit of the Anita Tower and the artifact spirit of Primeval that Master has seen, are the same as the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. They're undying existences. Even grand exalts can't kill us. They can only suppress or seal us up, making us extremely weak. However, the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance is the one with the most miserable fate. I think it must have endured the most terrifying attacks from grand exalts in the past, causing its body to collapse and its consciousness to disperse. Although it's not truly dead, who knows how long it'll take for it to recover in its current condition. And once it recovers, it'll probably lose all of its past memories. It'll develop a new consciousness and become the second artifact spirit, Ziying sighed gently. But that's fine too. Master, what's before you is a great, fortuitous encounter. Qing Suo's excited voice suddenly rang out. A great, fortuitous encounter? What fortuitous encounter? Jianqin asked curiously. The artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance has already collapsed and its consciousness has dispersed, but its power still remains in the Tower of Radiance. Master, didn't you have the Labyrinth of Light when you were in the lower world? The artifact spirit of the Radiant Saint artifact was condensed from the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force after a series of complicated evolutions. From a certain perspective, it comes from the same source as the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. We can completely let the artifact spirit of the Radiant Saint artifact fuse with the power and remnant consciousness of the Tower of Radiance's artifact spirit and replace it with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance through the method of stealing the sun. Qing Suo said excitedly. P.S. I'm going to continue writing. The second chapter will probably be very late. Moreover, Xiaoyao will be releasing a ranking of battle prowess on his WeChat account. The ranking is called the Ranking of Beauties and Experts. It will select the 10 most powerful female characters in the book. Brothers, if you're interested, please follow Xiaoyao's WeChat account and express your opinions. Xiaoyao's WeChat account is XingXingCiao110. For those who don't follow his account, please open your WeChat account. You'll see a blue public account at the top of your contact list. After clicking on it, you can directly search for Xiaoyao's WeChat account using the Add menu at the top right corner of the screen. Chapter 23:95. What? Let the artifact spirit devour the remnant power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, and replace it as the new artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance? Can the artifact spirit devour and fuse with each other? Jianchen leapt in fright from Qing Sua's words. Qing Sua's idea was just too shocking. It shocked even Jianchen. After all, this was clearly stealing a peak god artifact, and it was done in the most heavily guarded sacred hall of the Radiant Saint Hall. That was just audacious. However, a sliver of excitement and joy silently appeared in Jianchen's heart. He suddenly thought of something. If it really was as Qing Sua had said, and the Saint artifact spirit became the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, did that not mean he would become the new master of the Tower of Radiance? At that time, he would be able to control the Tower of Radiance through the artifact spirit. Everything in the Tower of Radiance would be his to take. Qing Sua! It shouldn't be that easy to replace the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance with the artifact spirit. After all, the difference in quality between the artifact spirit and the Tower of Radiance's artifact spirit is just too great. They're not on the same level at all. Jianchen calmed down very soon. He knew that replacing the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance would not be easy. If the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance could be replaced so easily, the past leaders of the Radiant Saint Hall probably would have taken the Tower of Radiance for themselves long ago. That's right. It's very difficult. It's so difficult that basically no Grand Prime can do it. However, just because others can't do it doesn't mean Ziying and I can't do it. Master, don't forget that Ziying and I are spirits condensed from a strand of Yin and Yang Qi when chaos first began. We have our own uniqueness. We might never be able to grasp the abilities of some Grand Primes, but let alone Grand Primes, even Grand Exalts who have become the heavenly ways, can't grasp some of our abilities, Qing Sua said. Ziying thought for a while before saying, if the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance is only injured, it's impossible for it to replace it. However, it's in an extremely horrible state right now. Its body has collapsed, and its consciousness has dispersed. Right now, it basically has no consciousness at all. All that's left is a ball of origin energy. As a matter of fact, it's already dead. Even if it recovers in the future, it'll be a completely new consciousness. It won't have any of its past memories. In other words, the conditions to replace the artifact spirit of the universe are extremely harsh. First, the artifact spirit has to end up like the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Secondly, the replacement has to be of the same origin as the artifact spirit. Master's artifact spirit is condensed from a strand of Radiant Saint Force origin energy after a series of complicated evolutions. Although it's on a very low level, it just happens to be of the same origin as the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. As a result, these conditions have been met. Thirdly, the origin of ways formed after a Grand Exalt's death must be used to mediate the replacement process so that the two artifact spirits can fuse. Lastly, we need to reverse Yin and Yang, reverse the laws, and deceive everyone so that we can carry out the final act of swapping. But where are we supposed to find the origin of ways formed after a Grand Exalt's death? Jianchen grumbled inside when he heard about the origin of ways. He had once obtained the origin of ways formed after the ancient Skywolf's death by coincidence on a desolate planet. However, he had already absorbed the origin of ways long ago. Not a single droplet remained. Master, Qing Sua and I have collected some of the ancient Skywolf's origin of ways as well. The origin of ways has always been with us. Originally, we were going to prepare it for Master's future breakthrough. But looking at it now, we won't be able to wait until then. The origin of ways we collected in the past will only benefit the artifact spirit for free. Ziying's voice rang out in Jianchen's head. Although the origin of ways is precious and rare, if the artifact spirit really succeeds, it won't be a loss to use the origin of ways on him. We already have the origin of ways. As for the final act of reversing yin and yang, reversing the laws and carrying out the final act of swapping, it will be completed by Ziying and I. However, Ziying and I haven't recovered our powers yet, so we'll need your assistance when the time comes, Master. Otherwise, we won't be able to complete it with just Ziying and I alone. Of course, whether the artifact spirit can replace the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance in the end will still depend on its own fate. Once it succeeds, the artifact spirit will undergo a qualitative change, reaching a whole new level and truly becoming the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. However, if it fails, it will die and truly disperse from the world. Qing Suo became stern towards the end. After a moment of thought, Jianqin said, "Let me ask the artifact spirit. It'll decide whether it's willing to try or not." Afterwards, Jianqin immediately communicated with the artifact spirit and told it what the sword spirit's thought. As for the artifact spirit, it immediately agreed excitedly without any hesitation at all when it heard Jianqin's suggestion. It did not hesitate at all. Becoming the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was equivalent to a weak fighter suddenly obtaining an almost invincible body. The temptation was just too great. Even if it was doomed from the slightest carelessness, it struggled to suppress its desire to become a supreme expert. "Changyang, what are you blanking out for? Do you feel unwell?" At this moment, Donglin Yen Shui's voice rang out in Jianqin's head. Donglin Yen Shui could not help but ask in concern when she saw Jianqin blanking out. Jianqin shook his head gently. "I'm fine, but I want to look around and find my own fortuitous encounters." "I'll go with you," Donglin Yen Shui said gently. "There's no need. I want to move alone." Jianqin declined without any hesitation. With that, he used his radiant wings to leave, vanishing into the dense mist in the blink of an eye. Donglin Yen Shui stood where she was in a daze as she stared in the direction that Jianqin had vanished in. She was gloomy and could not hide her disappointment. After distancing himself from Donglin Yen Shui, Jianqin no longer held back. He immediately rushed towards the depths of the sacred pavilion as quickly as he could. He understood that once the sword spirits truly began to reverse yin and yang, replacing the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, it would obviously cause an extremely great disturbance. No one could tell just what kind of phenomenon would occur. As a result, he needed to be far enough away from Donglin Yen Shui and the 8 protectors to prevent them from finding him and exposing his identity. After all, the exposure this time would not be as simple as his identity as martial soul force. It would be the existence of the sword spirits. Chapter 2396. The sacred pavilion of the Tower of Radiance was an extremely vast miniature world. No one knew just how large the miniature world was. Jianqin moved as fast as he could within the miniature world, shooting off into the distance with lightning speed. He moved extremely quickly, crossing 1,000 kilometers in a single instance. The mist that permeated the space did not seem to be able to affect him at all. His chaotic force could last him a very long time in the Tower of Radiance. Jianqin only stopped after traveling for an entire day. He sat down in an empty area, and with a thought, a golden streak of light immediately shot out from between his eyebrows, turning into a small tower. The tower was the Radiant Saint artifact. Ziying, Qing Suo, prepare to begin. Jianqin secretly communicated with the sword spirits. The sword spirits immediately appeared, condensing above Jianqin's head. They turned into an illusionary man and woman. Once you succeed, you'll undergo a complete transformation and become the new artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. You'll be countless times more powerful than before. However, if you fail, you'll truly vanish from the world. After all, you're not like us. You're undying. Are you ready? The sword spirits glared at the saint artifact. I'm ready. Riches come with danger. In order to obtain this opportunity to reach the heavens in a single step, I'll do anything even if I'm doomed. The artifact spirit of the radiant saint artifact said firmly, "Good. Now I'll teach you what to do." Replacing the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance is nowhere near as simple as it seems on the surface. We can only push you along. Whether you succeed in the end will still depend on your own fortune and fate. Afterwards, the sword spirits sternly explained the process and steps to the artifact spirit in detail. Afterwards, they called out, "Master, use chaotic flames to melt the saint artifact so that the artifact spirit can break free from the artifact's restraints." Jianshin's expression was solemn. He immediately activated his secret technique and ignited his chaotic energy to form chaotic flames that began to melt the radiant, sacred artifact. Jianshin's chaotic force had reached major achievement, so the chaotic flames formed from burning chaotic force were extremely terrifying. The radiant saint artifacts were not of high quality, so they immediately began to melt at a visible rate under the flames of the chaotic body. Moreover, the melted parts did not remain. Instead, they were directly vaporized and burned into nothingness by the chaotic flames. This was because only materials of a certain grade would remain after being burned by Jianshin's terrifying primal chaos flames. As the radiant saint force melted away bit by bit, the artifact spirit seemed to experience hellish pain. It produced a chilling cry. As the artifact spirit of the saint artifact, it was born from the saint artifact. It was inseparable from the saint artifact. If the saint artifact was destroyed, it would truly vanish from the world. This was because it was only an artifact spirit condensed from the inferior energy of a lower world. It was unable to achieve indestructibility like the sword spirits. Even if the sword spirit shattered, the spirit would continue to exist. Succeed or die trying. Once you've taken this step, there's no turning back. This is only the first step. You have to persist, or you'll be reduced to ashes, the sword spirit said softly. At the same time, the origin of ways formed from the death of a grand exalt shot out from their hands, enveloping the artifact spirit. We'll use a strand of the origin of ways to protect your body so that it will remain indestructible, but you cannot avoid the pain. You can only rely on yourself. Remember, even though you're protected by the origin of ways, your consciousness will still collapse once you're unable to endure the pain. It will be reduced to the energy of the world. The sword spirits called out gently. They were extremely stern as well. Although they were in charge of replacing the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance with the artifact spirit of the Saint Artifact, they could only push it along. Whether it would succeed or not still depended on the artifact spirit. In just a few seconds, the Radiant Saint Artifact had truly been reduced to nothingness by the chaotic flames. The artifact spirit had been reduced to a fist-sized ball of light. This was its form, but it was also its consciousness. It was equivalent to the soul of a person. Originally, it would live and die with the Saint Artifact. If the Saint Artifact was destroyed, it would not be able to survive. This was the natural law of the world. However, it just happened to be protected by the Origin of Ways. The Origin of Ways had been left behind by Grand Exalts before they passed away. Before Grand Exalts died, they were existences equivalent to the heavenly ways. They could defy the laws and control the operation of the heavenly ways. As a result, under the protection of the Origin of Ways, the artifact spirit had basically broken the laws and interfered with the heavenly ways. That was why it could survive. Quick, fuse with the origin of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. The origin of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance is everywhere. You come from the same source as it, so you can sense its existence. You have to complete all of this before our Origin of Ways runs out, or you'll still be reduced to ashes without the protection of the Origin of Ways. The sword spirits called out as the Origin of Ways constantly poured out from their hands. The artifact spirit said nothing. It immediately began to fuse with all the power it sensed from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Originally, the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was terrifyingly great. Even a tiny sliver of its power was enough to wipe out its soul and make it truly disperse from the world. This was because the two of them were not on the same level at all. It had no right to devour or fuse with it. However, it was different with the origin of ways left behind by grand exalts. The origin of ways enveloped the artifact spirit, which was equivalent to creating new laws of the world, forcefully changing everything and adjusting the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Only then did the artifact spirit possess the right to absorb the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. The power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance began to be absorbed by the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Every time it absorbed a sliver of the power of the Tower of Radiance, the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance would swell at an unbelievable rate as if it had eaten a great tonic. Its original body strengthened at an unimaginable rate. It became more and more powerful at an unimaginable rate. The power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was just too terrifying. Even a sliver of it was enough to strengthen the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance by countless times. As the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance rapidly strengthened, it gradually absorbed the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance at a faster and faster rate. As the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was rapidly absorbed, the entire world within the Tower of Radiance changed drastically. The mist that permeated the Tower of Radiance originally came from the resentment of the Tower of Radiance's artifact, spirit of the Tower of Radiance, after it collapsed. This resentment seemed to have a bit of spirituality in it. At this moment, the resentment seemed to sense something. It suddenly surged violently and began to rapidly gather from all directions. It began to attack the artifact spirit of the origin of ways with surging fury. Chapter 2397. Immediately, the rate at which the artifact spirit absorbed the power of the Tower of Radiance's artifact spirit was greatly affected. It gradually slowed down, even though it was protected by the origin of ways, which prevented it from being affected by the grievances. However, the grievances were condensed from the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit after all. Even though the lingering consciousness had basically lost its consciousness, it still possessed an instinctive reaction. At this moment, the lingering consciousness began to resist the devouring and fusion of the artifact spirit under its instinctive reaction. At the same time, the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit mobilized a portion of the power that permeated the Tower of Radiance, turning it into various attacks in an attempt to devour the artifact spirit instead. However, in the end, no matter how great the power the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit mobilized, no matter how sharp and terrifying the attacks were, they would immediately become gentle as soon as they approached the origin of ways. All the sharpness and killing intent would be erased. This was because the origin of ways had basically given birth to new laws. Once it entered the origin of ways, it would have to follow the laws set down by the origin of ways, no matter how great the power was. If the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was in its peak condition, it would be able to fend off the laws set down by the origin of ways with its power as a peak god artifact. However, it was only a lingering consciousness now. It was not even a 10,000th of what it was when it was alive. It was naturally powerless before the origin of ways. It was completely subdued. You're too slow. At this rate, you won't be able to take the Tower of Radiance. If you don't fuse with all the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance before the origin of ways runs out, you won't be able to truly fuse with the Tower of Radiance. Without the Tower of Radiance as a shell to support you, you'll only be reduced to ashes. The path that the artifact spirit walked right now was fraught with danger. The slightest carelessness could lead to irrecoverable doom, truly vanishing from the world. As a result, the two sword spirits were filled with nervousness. Jianqin also sternly stared at the artifact spirit. He felt nervous inside. The origin of ways that had formed when a grand exalt passed away was constantly being depleted. Although he had no idea how much origin of ways the sword spirits had collected back then, it definitely would not last for long. He wanted to assist the artifact spirit, but it was already a battle between the artifact spirit and the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Let alone him, even the sword spirits were unable to help. At the same time, Donglin Yen Shui had already gathered with the 8 protectors in another place far away in the sacred pavilion. The 8 protectors all sat with their eyes closed. Clearly, they were exchanging the ancient imprints that floated through the air. Donglin Yen Shui sat among the 8 protectors, protected by them like stars around a moon. Her snow-white and luxurious, chosen, saint attire tightly wrapped around her tall and slender figure. Her picturesque face was filled with a hint of lust, which filled her with a sense of purity and beauty. At this moment, Donglin Yen Shui and the 8 protectors all snapped open their eyes at the same time. They looked at the surroundings in surprise. The grudges that permeated the surroundings, or even the entire world, suddenly surged violently. They turned into torrents that surged in the same direction. At the same time, all of them, including Donglin Yen Shui, could clearly sense a surging fury that seemed to originate from the world. It felt like the fury of the sky, the fury of the world, and the fury of the world. It was dignified and vast, directly reaching their souls and affecting their emotions. What's going on? What's happening? Why has something like this happened in the sacred pavilion that I've never heard of before happened? Donglin Yen Shui and the 8 protectors all stood up and looked around in surprise and doubt. The monstrous fury that seemed to originate from the world affected all of their emotions, making it difficult for them to remain calm. An inexplicable fury rose from the bottom of their hearts, making them restless and impatient. They were unable to calm down at all. It seems like the fury from the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, a protector said with uncertainty. The fury from the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit? How is that possible? Does the lingering consciousness still have thoughts and emotions? But why is it angry? Another protector asked with a confused expression. At this moment, a smear of surprise appeared on Donglin Yen Shui's face. She called out gently, "Have you discovered that the grudges here seem to be weakening?" "It really is weakening. Something shocking must have happened in the sacred pavilion. Let's go. Let's go in the direction of the grudges and see what's happening at the source of the change." The protectors escorted Donglin Yen Shui towards Genshin's location with lightning speed. As time passed, more and more power fused with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance's artifact spirit in Genshin's direction. With the assistance of this power, the artifact spirit became more and more powerful. In particular, when it reached a certain level of strength, the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance's retaliation and resistance seemed rather powerless. As a result, it became easier for the artifact spirit to fuse with the power of the Tower of Radiance. Naturally, it moved faster and faster. Jianshin gradually stopped worrying when he saw this. He knew that the fusion of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was set in stone. This step had truly been completed. However, he still did not dare to become careless because it was not truly over yet. Several hours later, the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was finally absorbed by the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. The grudges that permeated the entire space decreased as well, but they did not disperse completely. They had only become much thinner. The artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance had become extremely powerful after fusing with all the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. At that moment, it seemed like a dazzling sun, shining with dazzling light. Even Jianshin felt pressured when he stood before it. Of course, the artifact spirit of the Saint Artifact was unable to control it completely after suddenly obtaining such terrifying power. It tottered in the air, unable to stabilize itself. The origin of ways is about to run out. Quick, before the origin of ways runs out, Fuse all your power into the Tower of Radiance and refine it. Truly fuse with the Tower of Radiance so that the Tower of Radiance becomes your new body. This is the final step, as well as the most difficult step. If you succeed, you will become the new artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance in the future. If you fail, you will be doomed forever. You will truly vanish from the world, Xing said loudly. Afterwards, he and Qing Sua left Jianshin's head. They arrived in the air as two streams of air, one violet and one azure. They formed a huge Tai Chi diagram that revolved around each other rapidly. Chapter 2398. This was the origin energy of the sword spirits. It was not sword chi. Instead, it was yin and yang chi from the beginning of chaos. Chaos was divided into yin and yang. The origin energy of the sword spirits was naturally extremely powerful. Every single one of them was on the same level as the artifact spirit of Primeval and the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, or even greater than them. This was because once the yin and yang chi fused, they would return to their original state and turn into chaos, true chaotic force. However, both Xing and Qing Sua were still weak and had yet to recover. As a result, their current strength was nowhere close to their peak condition. The power they displayed did not give off too great of a pressure. However, Jianshin could still sense a presence that seemed to split the world apart with his sharp senses. The appearance of the presence seemed to even disturb the laws of the world. At the same time, the artifact spirit that had fused with all the power of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance became dimmer and dimmer at a visible rate. Its body rapidly vanished. It was fusing with the Tower of Radiance, bit by bit according to the method imparted to it by the sword spirits. It had truly fused with the Tower of Radiance, turning the Tower of Radiance into a new shell that could hold its body. This was the most crucial step, as well as the most important step. Whether they could successfully replace the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance would depend on this step. At this moment, a tremendous heavenly might suddenly appeared. It descended upon the Tower of Radiance with a supreme power that seemed to be able to obliterate everything. The heavenly might did not come from within the Tower of Radiance. Instead, it came from the outside world. However, it passed through the Tower of Radiance without any obstruction and directly descended upon the sacred pavilion. This was the power of the heavens. It was powerful and terrifying, enough to make all living things shiver. It truly possessed the power to destroy worlds. After all, the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance originated from the universe. It was a power on the same level as the sword spirits, the artifact spirit of Primeval, and the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. It was protected by the laws of the world and was undying. However, when the artifact spirit attempted to devour the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance and replace it, it would naturally violate the laws of the world. The rules of the heavenly path did not allow such a thing to happen. The power of the heavenly path descended in an attempt to destroy the artifact spirit. However, as soon as the power of the heavenly ways appeared, all the heavenly secrets in the artifact space suddenly became hazy and blurry. A mysterious power suddenly appeared, throwing the laws into chaos and obscuring the heavenly secrets in an attempt to conceal the world. At the crucial moment, the sword spirits took action. They were still unable to directly contend against the heavenly laws, but they could reverse yin and yang, preventing the heavenly laws from sensing them. Master, chaotic force! The sword spirits called out. Jianshin did not hesitate at all. The chaotic Naiden in his dantian began to revolve rapidly. Strands of pure chaotic force surged out from the Naiden before turning into a stream of energy, pouring into the sword spirits without holding back at all. His chaotic force was like poison to other cultivators. Their bodies were unable to endure the terrifying power, but it was like the greatest tonic to the sword spirits. With the assistance of Genshin's chaotic force, the sword spirits immediately began to grow in strength. As their strength increased, their ability to reverse yin and yang and throw the laws of the world into chaos after working together became even greater as well. As a result, all the heavenly secrets in the surroundings were immediately obscured. With the heavenly secrets obscured and the laws disrupted, the descending power of the heavenly path immediately lost its target like a blind man. It lingered around for a while before gradually dispersing. However, the sword spirits did not stop. They continued to consume their origin energy, turning it into yin and yang, disrupting the laws of the world and obscuring the heavenly secrets so that the laws of the world could not sense them. At this very moment, what they were doing was truly deceiving the heavens to cross the sea. Jianqin did not relax during this period of time. Clearly, the sword spirit's disruption of the laws would continue for quite some time. As long as the sword spirits did not stop, he needed to constantly provide them with chaotic force. Jianqin immediately frowned when he sensed the rate at which his chaotic force was being depleted. This was because his chaotic force was being consumed at a rate several hundred times faster than when he fought, or even 1,000 times faster. He could basically feel his chaotic Niden shrink with every passing second. Who knows how many resources I'll have to use to replenish my chaotic force after this. However, as long as the artifact spirit succeeds, it'll be worth it no matter how much chaotic force I use, thought Jianqin. He sat on the ground like an inexhaustible source of energy, constantly supplying the sword spirits with energy. The artifact spirit had completely vanished from the world. Even Jianqin was unable to sense it. It was as if it had completely fused with the space there. However, as long as the sword spirits continued to disrupt the laws of yin and yang, it meant that the artifact spirit had not succeeded. Time passed silently. After 2 whole days, the sword spirits finally stopped and turned back into the illusory figures of a man and a woman. However, their figures were even dimmer than before. Exhaustion filled their faces as well. Clearly, they had expended a lot of energy. We've already successfully fooled everyone. This is as far as we can help him. He can only rely on himself for the final step of fusing with the Tower of Radiance. Now all we can do is wait for the final result, Xing said weakly. With that, he and Qing Suo turned into 2 streaks of light, one violet and one azure, and disappeared into Jianqin's body. They fell into a deep slumber. Jianqin sat on the ground as he stared at the desolate world where most of the mist had dispersed. He felt eager. Artifact spirit, you have to succeed. Don't let us down. Suddenly, Jianqin's eyes narrowed. They immediately pierced through the mist and reached several tens of thousand kilometers away. Now that the mist in the Tower of Radiance had been drastically reduced, its influence on Jianqin had decreased as well. As a result, he could clearly see several tens of thousand kilometers away. He could clearly see the 8 protectors hurrying over with Donglin Yanxue. I need to go somewhere else. Jianqin stood up and erased all the traces he had left behind before leaving silently. Soon after he had left, Donglin Yanxue and the 8 protectors appeared. The source of the disturbance should be here, but the strange thing is that everything is the same as before. There's nothing strange about it. The 8 protectors patrolled the surroundings and searched carefully. They were all confused. Use the senses of your soul, said Donglin Yanxue. Due to the mist here, the senses of our souls can only reach a few dozen kilometers away. However, I've already checked the surrounding few dozen kilometers. I've found nothing, said a protector. It's impossible for the mist here to decrease for no reason. Something must have happened in the sacred pavilion. We just came too late, said another protector. Afterwards, under Donglin Yanshue's instructions, the protectors basically dug through the surrounding 1,000 kilometers and carefully searched every inch of the place. The result was obvious. They found nothing. 100,000 kilometers away, Jianqin sat on a hill quietly. Originally, he had entered the sacred pavilion to obtain the high-level cultivation methods of Radiant Saint Masters, but he was in no mood to search for the ancient imprint now. Right now, the success or failure of the artifact spirit was countless times more important than collecting the cultivation methods. Even if the legendary Grand Exalt's cultivation method was placed before him, it would not shake his concern for the artifact spirit. Unfortunately, he had no idea about the current situation of the artifact spirit, nor was he able to do anything about it. All he could do was wait there quietly. Chapter 2399. Jianqin sat on the small hill for several days. He seemed calm on the surface, but he was unsettled inside. He also felt slightly worried. Several days had already passed, but nothing had happened to the Tower of Radiance. Even the artifact spirit did not appear at all. His heart was filled with worry for the artifact spirit. Even though he had sensed the ancient imprints floating through the space several times already, he was not interested at all. Changyang, why have you come so far? At this moment, Donglin Yen Shue's voice rang out from afar. She was pleasantly surprised. Donglin Yen Shue flew towards the small hill where Jianqin resided under the company of 8 protectors. Donglin Yen Shue stood beside Jianqin. She lowered her head and looked at the seated Jianqin. The light in her eyes flowed as she asked gently, Changyang, you must have benefited quite a lot in the past few days, right? Donglin Yen Shue's voice was filled with gentleness. The protectors behind her all seemed to have expected it when they heard her voice. Afterwards, they looked at Jianqin in some surprise. If it was before, some of them still held some doubts about Donglin Yen Shue's feelings for Changyang. They no longer had any doubts when they heard the gentleness Donglin Yen Shue showed towards Jianqin. This was because all of them could clearly sense that Donglin Yen Shue's attitude towards Jianqin was very different from how she treated them. I wonder what Changyang is capable of. He actually managed to win the chosen saint's heart so quickly. The protectors all sighed inside. They all gave Jianqin a thumbs up. They had been convinced by Jianqin's methods. Jianqin sat on the hill without moving at all. He stared at the vast land in a daze, as if he had not sensed the approach of Donglin Yen Shue and the others at all. He only shook his head gently and said nothing. At this moment, all of his attention was placed on waiting for the artifact spirit. He was in no mood to chat with Donglin Yen Shue. Donglin Yen Shue did not mind Jianqin's coldness. She sat down beside Jianqin and looked at Jianqin from the side. Even though Jianqin seemed extremely calm after his disguise, he possessed an indescribable attraction to Donglin Yen Shue. Changyang, the contents of the ancient imprints of the sacred pavilion are all at the level of the primordial realm. It's many times more difficult to obtain them than outside. You've only been in the sacred pavilion for a few days, so it's only normal that you haven't gained anything. Donglin Yen Shue thought that Jianqin had become dejected because of his lack of gains, so she comforted him gently. Actually, it's not just you. All of us haven't gained anything either. However, you don't have to worry too much. For some reason, the mist in the Tower of Radiance has suddenly decreased. It's become much thinner, so we can spend more time here. I believe that with your talent, you'll definitely gain something in the end. Changyang only has a 1-colored soul core, and his talent seems to only be at the 1 star. What talent can he have? The protectors behind Donglin Yen Shue all pouted when they heard what she said. At this moment, the mist in the sacred pavilion surged once again. It was like a serpent was churning within, causing the space there to distort. The ground below them trembled gently as well. At that moment, the world within the Tower of Radiance seemed to have been revived from the dead. It had suddenly gained life. The veins of the earth began to awaken, and the slumbering power seemed to gradually awaken as well. A gleam of light flashed through Jianqin's eyes. He suddenly stood up and glanced past the surroundings. His eyes gradually lit up. He knew that the sudden changes in the Tower of Radiance were definitely related to the artifact spirit, which filled him with anticipation. What's happening? What's happening? How can the world within the Tower of Radiance shake? What's going on with the Tower of Radiance? Why are strange things happening again and again? There's never been any records of the abnormalities of the Tower of Radiance in the ancient records. This sudden and unexpected event caused the hearts of the 8 Tao protectors to be uneasy. All of them revealed anxious and uneasy expressions, and none of them knew what had happened. At this moment, extremely pure radiant saint force suddenly permeated the surroundings. No one knew where it came from. It seemed to have appeared out of nowhere before rapidly expanding in all directions. It enveloped the entire world and gradually filled every inch of the Tower of Radiance. When the 8 protectors sensed the origin energy, they were all stunned at first. In the next moment, they ravished with joy. What pure radiant saint force! It's actually denser than the Sacred Hall and it seems to contain fragments of laws. The radiant saint force really does contain fragments of the laws of the hallowed. Absorbing the fragments is equivalent to directly absorbing the power of the laws of the hallowed. It'll make it easier for us to comprehend. This is a great fortuitous encounter. It's a great fortuitous encounter. We can't miss it. Everyone, cultivate. Yeah. Hurry up and cultivate. Cultivate. Don't waste any time. The 8 protectors were overjoyed. They were overjoyed. They immediately sat down and began to cultivate as hard as they could. They did their best to absorb the fragments of the laws of the hallowed in the radiant saint force. Changyang, what are you blanking out for? Hurry up and cultivate. You can't miss this opportunity. Yan Shui called out to Jianqin before immediately entering cultivation as well. Jianqin sensed it silently before slowly closing his eyes as well. He began to cultivate. At the same time, a white-robed figure surrounded by light sat in a secret room within the radiant Saint Hall. He naturally gave off a tremendous pressure, and the space in the entire room seemed to have frozen because of the pressure. Moreover, extremely powerful laws of the hallowed revolved around this person. His comprehension of the laws of the hallowed had clearly reached an extremely profound level, causing every single strand of the laws of the hallowed around him to possess devastating power. He was the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, the supreme existence of the Radiant Saint Hall. Suddenly, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall opened his eyes. His gaze was as sharp as a blade, piercing through space as he looked in the direction of the Tower of Radiance. He murmured, "The heavenly secrets have appeared. Something has happened to the Tower of Radiance." With that, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall vanished silently. When he reappeared, he was already outside the Tower of Radiance that had been bound by the Grand Exalt. "Why have you come?" An indifferent voice rang out from nowhere. The vice leader, Xian Zhan, also appeared silently. "Leader, why have you come personally? Has something happened in the Tower of Radiance?" Another voice sounded, and there was a hint of respect in his tone. Vice Palace Master Mo, he had also appeared. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall stared at the Tower of Radiance closely. The light in his eyes flickered as he became surprised and doubtful. He said, "When I was cultivating, I suddenly resonated with the world and understood the heavenly secrets. Something has probably happened in the Tower of Radiance." "What? Something has happened in the Tower of Radiance?" Xian Zhan and Mo's faces changed when they heard that. They immediately became stern. "What has happened in the Tower of Radiance?" Xian Zhan asked sternly. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall shook his head and said sternly, "The heavenly secrets are hidden. It's hazy and unclear. I can't see it clearly, so I have no idea if it's good or bad. Wait here. I'll go in and take a look. I'll see what has happened in the Tower of Radiance." Chapter 2400. With that, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall personally took action. Through a special method, he opened a door in the formation around the Tower of Radiance, and with a flash he vanished. He had entered the Tower of Radiance. Vice Leader Xianzhan and Vice Leader Mo, he needed to work together to open the Tower of Radiance. But the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall could easily do it all by himself. This was more than enough to demonstrate just how powerful the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall was. I never thought that the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall would enter the Tower of Radiance personally this time. It looks like the matters in the Tower of Radiance really are extraordinary, or it wouldn't have alarmed the leader. Mo, he said sternly as he watched the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall vanish. The Tower of Radiance is the foundation of our Radiant Saint Hall. It's the most precious treasure of our Radiant Saint Hall, so we can't let anything happen to it, Vice Leader Xian Zhan said sternly. Then he looked at Mo, and said, "Even the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall is unable to tell whether what has happened in the Tower of Radiance is good or bad. However, just in case, we need to prepare for the worst. Immediately summon the 6 other Vice Leaders and get them to return immediately, just in case anything happens. Yeah, we can't be careless when it comes to the Tower of Radiance. We need to make the most comprehensive preparations. I'll contact the others immediately." Vice Leader Mo, he said sternly before immediately backing off. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall strolled through the barren land with his hands behind his back like he was taking a stroll. He did not move quickly, but with each step he seemed to cross 2 different spaces, crossing 1,000,000 kilometers in a single instance. It was as if the distance between spaces no longer posed much of an obstacle to him. His strength had reached a terrifying level where he could ignore space to a certain extent. He could even twist the laws to a certain extent and interfere with the operation of the heavenly ways after some difficulty. This was the terrifying strength of a Grand Prime. Grand Primes were existences who stood at the apex of the saints' world. They were the highest level of cultivation. Even the 7 renowned Grand Exalts were at this level of cultivation. Even Grand Primes differed in strength. The sovereigns of the world who had obtained the title of Grand Exalt were terrifying existences who had reached the limits of Grand Primes. They had truly comprehended a law and grasped all its mysteries. As a result, Grand Exalts who had reached the limits of Grand Primes were existences akin to the laws of the world. They represented the greatest will in the world, truly supreme. The mist in the Tower of Radiance has actually weakened by so much. Moreover, it's still dispersing at an extremely slow rate. If this continues, the mist in the Tower of Radiance will probably disperse completely in a few years. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall moved through the Tower of Radiance with terrifying speed. He carefully observed every single change in the Tower of Radiance. Moreover, his eyes would shine with sharp light from time to time, piercing through space as if he was staring at the depths of the Tower of Radiance. The mist there was unable to affect him at all. What happened in the Tower of Radiance? How did this pure radiant saint force come about? And where did the fragments of the laws of the hallowed come from? The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall was filled with doubt as well. The ancient records that the Radiant Saint Hall had kept for countless years did not record what was happening in the Tower of Radiance. In other words, this was the first time this had happened. There had never been a precedent. Has the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance awakened? Apart from the artifact spirit, there's probably nothing else that can make the Tower of Radiance change so drastically. Even I can't do it. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's eyes became abnormally bright when he reached that conclusion. Even with his mental fortitude, he was shaken. Let me peer into it and see if I can see the truth from the heavenly secrets. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall closed his eyes and fused with the ways. He resonated with the world and peered into the past and future. However, he opened his eyes very soon and shook his head gently with a sigh. After all, the Tower of Radiance was a peak god artifact personally forged by a Grand Exalt. It was just too great. With the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's current cultivation, he was unable to peer into any of its secrets. With a flash, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall crossed an extremely great distance and appeared outside a small building. He directly entered the building and entered the miniature world within the sacred pavilion. Very soon, he arrived at the place where the sword spirits had reversed the yin and yang and performed the sky-stealing sun-swapping. He stared at it for a while before closing his eyes. He stood there silently with his hands behind his back, as if he was resonating with the world. This place seems to be the source of the abnormalities in the Tower of Radiance. It's a pity that a mysterious and powerful force has disrupted the heavenly secrets, as if it's purposefully obscuring this place. It's impossible to peer into the past. Is it the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance? The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall thought to himself. He glanced at Donglin Shui and the others who were cultivating on the small hill in the distance, indifferently. However, he dismissed his doubts afterwards. Even he was unable to understand everything that had happened in the Tower of Radiance, so he naturally believed that the kids had no idea. It was even more impossible for him to suspect them. This was because countless powerful leaders had tried to awaken the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance throughout history, but none of them had succeeded. Even the past leaders had failed, so it was obviously impossible for these kids. It looks like it's extremely likely to be the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. After all, the Grand Exalt of Ancient Paths had personally said that the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance had not truly died. It would slowly recover at a certain point in the future. The leader of the past has already recorded what the Grand Exalt of Ancient Paths said, and has been passed down generation after generation. It looks like it's time for the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance to awaken. After reaching that conclusion, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall vanished with a flash, leaving the Tower of Radiance. "Leader, what's going on in the Tower of Radiance?" A vice leader immediately asked as soon as the leader emerged from the Tower of Radiance. He was nervous. Aside from Xian Zhan and Mo He, 6 more people had appeared outside the Tower of Radiance. They all possessed extremely powerful presences. The 6 other vice leaders of the Radiant Saint Hall had all gathered there as well. At that instant, the 8 vice hall leaders had all arrived. After a moment of thought, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall said the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance should be recovering. We can basically conclude that the changes in the Tower of Radiance are caused by the artifact spirit. What? The artifact spirit has awakened? The 8 vice leaders all roused with interest when they heard that. Chapter 2401. The mist in there is rapidly diminishing. Once it disperses completely, it can become a place of protection where all the late divine king of our Radiant Saint Hall can hide. As long as we have the protection of the Tower of Radiance, even if that mysterious person appears again, he won't be able to harm the Radiant God Kings hiding in the Tower of Radiance. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall growled as a vicious light flashed through his eyes. The 8 vice leaders all fell silent when they heard that. They thought about the mysterious expert who had reduced their Radiant Saint Hall to such a horrible state in the past several 100,000 years. They all felt bitter inside. The mysterious expert had brought endless humiliation to their Radiant Saint Hall. Not only had he killed so many Radiant God Kings, but he had even killed his way into the Sacred Hall alone. It was like he had entered a place where no one could stop him. There was nothing they could do. Just because of him, the Radiant Saint Hall had basically become suffocated. Even when the Radiant Saint Hall asked for help from the other peak organizations on the desolate plain and promised great amounts of money, none of them dared to help them. This was because that person was so powerful that all the peak experts on the desolate plain shivered in fear. Many people believed that no one on the desolate plain could stand up to him apart from the celestial Sword Saint. The Tower of Radiance is undergoing great changes right now. Not only has even pure Radiant Saint Force appeared, but it also contains fragments of the laws of the Hallowed. These fragments won't exist forever, so we have to make good use of them before they disperse. We can't waste them, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall said. Immediately pass down the order to open the Tower of Radiance early so that the disciples with enough merit can enter and cultivate. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall continued and passed down the order firmly. Leader, the Tower of Radiance has been specially opened for the chosen saint this time, said Mo. The chosen saint has reserved the right to open the Tower of Radiance. Immediately get the elders to gather the disciples and let them in as soon as possible. We can't waste too much time. Moreover, the fragments won't be of much help to the elders who have condensed soul trees, so only elders and below can enter the Tower of Radiance this time. As soon as the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall gave the order, the 8 vice leaders immediately carried it out. They got the elders under them to announce their preparations. The abnormality of the Tower of Radiance this time was extremely significant to the Radiant Saint Hall. As a result, the Radiant Saint Hall opened the Tower of Radiance prematurely and lowered the entry requirements, allowing many people a chance. As soon as the news spread, it immediately caused a great uproar in the Radiant Saint Hall. Many disciples signed up enthusiastically, so in just a short day, over 100,000 people had signed up. Basically, all of them were hallowed Saint Masters who had comprehended the laws of the hallowed, ranging from the Divine King and the lords of the various peaks to hallowed Saint Masters with 4-colored soul cores who were only equivalent to deities. Of course, there were even more people who did not have the right to participate. To the Radiant Saint Hall that possessed 1 million disciples, over 100,000 disciples who had signed up were only 1/10 of their total population. Under the lead of several thousand Divine King, the disciples who had signed up gathered outside the Tower of Radiance in an orderly manner. As soon as the Tower of Radiance was opened, they all turned into streaks of light and entered in a single line. Heavens, what dense radiant saint force! The sacred hall is already a sacred land of cultivation in our hearts, yet the abundant energy in the Tower of Radiance is much more powerful than the sacred hall. Most importantly, there are fragments of the laws of the hallowed in the radiant saint force. This is a fortuitous encounter that can only be encountered by luck. Cultivating for a year here is probably equivalent to cultivating for 100 years or even 1,000 years outside. This is only the outer layer of the Tower of Radiance. Just the outer layer is so dense, so wouldn't the inner layer be even more terrifying? As soon as they set foot in the Tower of Radiance, the Divine King could not help but sigh in amazement. Their eyes all lit up as they seemed extremely excited. Afterwards, they all flew towards the sacred pavilion. As Divine King of Radiance, they had all cultivated for countless years and had entered the Tower of Radiance more than once. As a result, they were familiar with the Tower of Radiance. At the same time, Jian Chun, Donglin Yanxue, and the others sat down in the sacred pavilion of the Tower of Radiance. They cultivated on the small hill, constantly absorbing the origin energy in the surroundings, as well as the fragments of the laws of the hallowed that were mixed within it. At this moment, the radiant saint force around Jianchen surged. The radiant saint force that had condensed around him immediately became much more powerful. The soul core in his head began to revolve rapidly as well. Gradually, a second color appeared. With the appearance of the second color, Jianchen had formally reached the level of a 2-colored soul core as a radiant Saint Master. I still broke through. I can't suppress it even if I want to. Jianchen did not rejoice after reaching the level of a 2-colored soul core. Instead, he sighed inside. He had used 4 years to go from a 1-colored soul core to a 2-colored soul core. Compared to the radiant Saint Masters who had failed to reach the 2-colored soul core after spending over a century or even several centuries, this was just a little too fast. In reality, he had not truly focused on cultivation during the past 4 years. He had only spent most of his time comprehending the laws of the hallowed. Otherwise, he would have reached the level of a 2-colored soul core long ago. However, since he wanted to absorb the fragments of the laws of the hallowed, he could not avoid absorbing the radiant saint force here. As a result, he could not suppress his breakthrough even if he wanted to. He reached the level of a 2-colored soul core uncontrollably. At this moment, Jianchen seemed to sense something. He suddenly looked into the distance, and his gaze pierced through the thinning mist. He directly looked several tens of thousand kilometers away, and he immediately frowned. Why have so many radiant, divine king appeared all of a sudden? Jianchen thought. He could clearly see several tens of thousand kilometers away. Over 30 radiant, divine king hurried over. It looks like the abnormality of the Tower of Radiance has alarmed the upper echelon of the sacred hall. The light in Jianshin's eyes flickered. He closed his eyes silently and continued to cultivate as if nothing had happened. Oh no, someone's coming. When the group of people were 1,000 kilometers away from the hill, the 8 protectors beside Donglin, Yen, Shui all sensed them. They called out and stopped cultivating. The mist in the Tower of Radiance rapidly weakened, and the effects on the senses of the Divine King's souls became smaller and smaller. They could now sense a range of 1,000 kilometers. Very soon, the group of radiant God Kings gradually appeared before everyone's eyes. Among the 30 or so people, a small half of them were women. They were of different ages, but all of them were beautiful and had elegant temperaments. The woman at the very front seemed to be close to middle age, but she still retained her charm. Time had not left a mark on her face at all. The radiant God Kings behind him all seemed to follow the woman's lead. Auntie! Donglin Yen Shui immediately stood up when she saw the middle-aged woman. She was shocked. To no surprise, the middle-aged woman at the very front was the Lord of the Myriad Flowers Peak, Donglin Qiushui. Auntie, why have you come in? Donglin Yen Shui immediately went up to receive her and asked in surprise. Logically speaking, there should have been no one else apart from her and the 9 retainers when the Tower of Radiance opened this time. Yet so many radiant God Kings had suddenly appeared right now. This time, we're not the only ones who've come in. Even more people have entered the Tower of Radiance. Basically, all the lords of the 99 main peaks have come, said Donglin Qiushui. She glanced past Donglin Yen Shui's protector indifferently and paused on Jianshin slightly before continuing. Everyone knows that something has happened in the Tower of Radiance. You've always been in the Tower of Radiance, so have you investigated what happened? Chapter 2402. Auntie, we might have been in the Tower of Radiance the entire time, but even we don't know what's going on in there, Donglin Yen Shui said innocently. Donglin Qiushui was not surprised by this at all, although she had been hoping that she could obtain some useful information from Donglin Yen Shui. She knew that it was impossible. With Donglin Yen Shui and the other strength, it would probably be very difficult for them to obtain any useful information. It seems like the Tower of Radiance is heading in a good direction right now. Once the mist disappears, all the mid-Divine King Peak lords in our Radiant Saint Hall will be able to come here and break through. They'll safely undergo the late Divine King Tribulation here until they condense a soul tree and break through to another level of cultivation. Donglin Qiushui stared the mist deeply. Undisguised eagerness and desire filled the depths of her eyes. She was not the only one. Even the 30-odd Divine King experts behind her and Donglin and Shui's 8 retainers showed similar expressions. Many of them had already reached mid-Divine King and had remained stagnant at this level of cultivation for many years. In particular, Donglin Qiushui was on the verge of breaking through. She could have broken through many years ago and reached late Divine King. However, none of them dared to truly break through and reach late Divine King. This was because basically all the late Divine King Radiant Saint Masters had died in the past several 100,000 years. They had all been killed by an unbelievably powerful, mysterious expert. It was exactly because of this that not a single late Divine King expert had appeared in the Radiant Saint Hall. All of them suppressed their strength as much as they could so that they remained at mid-Divine King. They dared not advance to the next level of cultivation. Yen Shui used this opportunity to cultivate properly, condense a 7-colored soul core as soon as possible, and reach Divine King. Donglin Qiushui said to Donglin Yen Shui, "Yes, Aunt. And you, Changyang, your cultivation is the weakest, so you need to work even harder. All right, let's not waste any more time. Cultivate properly and condense the laws of the hallowed first." Donglin Qiushui called out to everyone before setting foot on the small hill. She sat down somewhere else. The radiant divine king behind Donglin Qiushui all sat down beside Donglin Qiushui and closed their eyes. Some of them had already reached the peak of the mid-divine king realm, but there were also some who had yet to reach the peak of the mid-divine king realm, so there was still room for improvement. However, radiant saint masters like Donglin Qiushui, who had reached the peak of mid-divine king, no longer absorbed the radiant saint force in the surroundings. Instead, they only comprehended the fragments of the laws of the hallowed, accumulating for future breakthroughs. In the blink of an eye, a month had already passed. After a month of cultivation, Jianqin had reached the peak of the two-colored soul core. He was only a step away from condensing a three-colored soul core. Of course, if he had cultivated normally, it would have been impossible for him to improve so quickly. This was all because of the extremely pure radiant saint force in the Tower of Radiance. In reality, not only had Jianqin's strength increased rapidly during the month, but so had the others. Many of the Divine King Radiant had gone from early Radiant Saint Force to mid-Radiant Saint Force. Donglin Yanshua had a late four-colored soul core, but she had successfully broken through to a five-colored soul core. She was equivalent to a god now. The Radiant Saint Force has already begun to weaken. At this moment, Jianqin slowly opened his eyes. He was in no hurry to break through to a three-colored soul core. Instead, he raised his head and looked at the sky. Now he could vaguely understand that the radiant saint force that had suddenly surged out from the Tower of Radiance was not endless. Has it already begun to weaken? 3 days later, Donglin Qiushui ended her cultivation nearby. She stood up and said to the people behind her, "Looks like the radiant saint force here is about to run out. Let's go check out somewhere else." The radiant divine king, radiant saint force, all stood up. None of them had entered a deep state of cultivation, so they immediately roused when Donglin Qiushui said that. Afterwards, Donglin Qiushui's group left the hill. In the following days, the radiant saint force that permeated the Tower of Radiance basically decreased extremely, clearly every day. The power of the laws of the hallowed within it weakened as well. Many divine king, radiant saint force had already left the places where they had cultivated before. They began to move around the sacred pavilion in search of a place with abundant radiant saint force to continue cultivating. There were also a few divine king, radiant saint force who gave up on cultivation and sat on the ground to sense the ancient imprints. They wanted to obtain their legacies. Donglin Yan, Shue's 8 protectors, stopped cultivating as well. They began to sense the ancient imprints. The origin energy in the Tower of Radiance had already decreased to a level that was slightly below the level of the sacred hall. The fragments of the laws of the hallowed mixed within were no longer beneficial to the divine king, radiant saint force either. There was no point in them continuing to cultivate. As for Donglin Yanshua, she continued to cultivate. She was nowhere near as powerful as the divine king radiant saint force, so even if the energy here decreased, it would not affect her too much. "Master!" At this moment, a voice that Jianqin had been waiting for all this time rang out in his head silently, as if it had come from the depths of his soul. "Artifact spirit!" Jianqin's mind shuddered at the sudden voice. He expanded his senses in an attempt to sense the location of the artifact spirit, but there was no trace of it at all. "Artifact spirit, have you succeeded?" Jianqin asked inside. He knew that the artifact spirit could sense his thoughts. "Master, I haven't succeeded completely. I've only gained control of the Tower of Radiance. There's still a very long way to go before I can fully control it. The Tower of Radiance is much more difficult to obtain than we imagined it to be. However, Master, I've already fused with some fragments of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance's memories. I know where the Master of the Tower of Radiance left behind his legacy imprint." Jianqin was overjoyed when he heard that. Just how great and terrifying was the Master of the Tower of Radiance. The legacy he left behind would definitely be on the level of grand exalts. It would be the greatest legacy in the world. Why had he come to the Tower of Radiance? Wasn't it to obtain a powerful cultivation method? Where is the legacy of the master of the Tower of Radiance? Jianqin immediately asked. It's in another independent miniature world. Only the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance can open the entrance to this miniature world, said the artifact spirit. I see. No wonder there's always a rumor about a Grand Exalt's cultivation method in the Tower of Radiance, but no one has actually seen it. As it turns out, it's stored in another miniature world, a miniature world that can only be opened by the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Jianchen understood.